Welcome, everybody. This is going to be kind of a bonus episode for the last word for the Ebontis YouTube channel. And the main reason I'm doing this today is one, the generosity of the gentleman you can see on screen, which I'll get to in just a second. But also, as game players, everybody likes to armchair and say, hey, if you could just have one guy in the corner do one thing, we'd have that content knocked out totally straight away. And recently on Twitter, my guest today had a very thoughtful thread. You can give criticism, you can give people a hard time, or you can actually give a giant answer of like 12 thread on Twitter and give very detailed reasons why things happen the way they do. So my goal today is to have a chat with the developer who has been doing what he's doing for over a decade and get into what it's like, kind of some of the meat of this all sprouted from what it's like to make a PvP map. And he's been doing
Yeah.
that for quite a while on both sides. But before we get into the nitty gritty, I just kind of want to get to know our guests. So, Alexis, if you kind of want to let us know, a little bit where you're from, and we've got kind of your background, but like, obviously you make games, we'll get there. As somebody who played them even from a young age, what is your history like with video games, just, as a wee little one?
Yeah, so I'm French, right? And that's kind of influenced a lot the kind of games I was playing when I was younger. I think back then in the early 90s, the game industry was a lot more fragmented. If you were American, it was unlikely that you would play Japanese games that often, right? And in Europe, we had kind of like a growing, a thriving game industry, and especially Ubisoft back then was like a publisher mainly. So they were publishing a lot of games, not developing that many. And they published a lot of cartoon-based games, and for our parents, that was a boon. That was like, oh, that's safe, right? You're
Yeah.
playing Tintin, or you're playing like Looney Tunes games. That's safe. So I think we pretty much all discovered video games through those cartoon games, and they were hard. They were like the Dark Souls at the time. They were super hard. They
Oh
were
no,
not
like
made.
I'm a Mega Man fan myself, so when it comes
Yeah,
to hard games, it's like everybody's like Souls. I'm like, this is just like 3D Mega Man because man, two lives and you die and you start all over. It's just no, like yeah, cutting your teeth on the tough stuff is. I want to ask you a question before you go too far. Growing up, I don't know your age, but you're probably somewhere close to mine, maybe a little younger. But growing up, how were video games viewed from like parents or from like schoolmates and stuff like that? How were games viewed growing up? Is it something that was like, oh, you like to play video games instead of sports, or is it more like, hey, this is kind of a cool different hobby to have?
oh, I think it was very similar to the US, like when we were watching, American teen movies, these kind of things. Like we see the same kind of things in Europe, not that strong,
Yeah.
obviously, but it was seen as kind of like a weird hobby. Like you should go play outside, you should do some sports. Playing video games is kind of useless. It was also before online. So I'm not too old. I'm 32. But it was before online gaming was really huge, especially on consoles. And I grew up with consoles, not with PCs, so that's
Yep.
kind of like where I came from. Parents saw that as kind of like TV, right? It's like they put you in front of TV. They don't have to be bothered. They
Yeah.
don't have to care about you for too long. So that was the kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then obviously kind of grew up a little bit with it. What are the big standouts from either childhood as you're growing up? What are the big standouts in games that really left a mark for you?
Yeah, I think after those cartoon-based games, right? Like we were huge on Japanese culture in France. We were one of the first countries that really imported anime and manga really, really strongly.
Hmm.
And that came with like Nintendo and Pokemon. Pokemon was massive, massive. Everybody was playing Pokemon. And
Yep.
it was also the first time I was really playing with friends, like, sharing Pokemons and talking about the same video game in the schoolyard, right? You can't play the game, but you have your friends and talk
Yep.
about it. So I think that was like the first time where it became like a phenomenon, right? A society thing that everybody's talking about it. Even my parents, they knew nothing about video games, but they knew Pokemon, right? And like you had a Pokemon card, the trading card game, you had the cartoon on TV, like you had really, it was like a thing. And I think that was like the first time where I realized it's not just like a niche thing. It's something that you can actually, you can make a career out of it. I also played a lot of Zelda, like the Nintendo generation is really my thing. So
Do you have a
um,
favorite Zelda?
yeah, I think Ocarina of Time, even through the lens of nostalgia, I play it again every few years.
Oh man.
I made my wife play it as well, and
Nice.
Oh, I realize it's a good game, right? It's like such a solid story. Hero save princess, and then they
Yeah, I
put a
mean,
little
it's hard to go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's a very safe kind of bet, but it worked really well. And when it's the first game I played, I think that was like in full 3D after like Super Mario 64, and I was like
Same.
mind blowing. You're like, oh, it's the most realistic thing I've ever seen.
Oh, I mean that one blew me. Mario 64, like I remember getting Nintendo 64, sitting like upstairs room, parents' house, playing that and stuff. And then but Zelda was different. Zelda was you were on an adventure, it was the big open space. Because it was probably one of the first open world-ish games. And
Yeah,
you had Epona with the horse and everything running around. So you actually had like a mount, which was probably one of the early ones. And then they also took it to a different level where you had a 3D puzzle like the water temple, like
yeah.
trying to understand, have like get the tools so you can get through it and everything. Like Zelda Ocarina of Time is still one of my favorites as well. So it's like you picked the perfect one. So preaching to the choir. But yeah, no,
This game,
Zelda is
as a
kind of a
player,
special one.
people don't realize, but this game was like probably so complicated to make because it was like they tried to do everything that was kind of difficult. You had mounts, so you have like to attach your character to something else. You have like those water levels that are changing. It's open world. Like you're making one of the first 3D games. Why are you putting all those difficulties on your side, right? And that was fantastic. And I think that kind of like put a bar that was so high for other developers to make a 3D game, and they really blew it. Like they really nailed it. And then they just used the same engine to make another game. Like very smart. Like I think those developers they
Oh,
understood everything.
yeah, Nintendo, while they beat to the, sound of their own drum sometimes, whether it's like what they're working on or their console choices or yeah, everything, it's like Nintendo is definitely its own. They do very special things sometimes. So
Yeah.
they're still one to watch no matter, how far we are into this whole gaming thing.
It's the same developers as well. Like I remember some time ago, I watched like a Iwata Asks or some like video that Nintendo was doing for the celebration. I don't remember which game, and they invited the original developers, the original leads that were working on this game, and those guys were still working there, and they were
That's
like in their 70s, and they were still leading teams, right? So yeah, it's crazy. They really kept the culture just literally by keeping the people, and that doesn't happen often. Yeah.
no, I mean, and that like I don't know too much about the like Eastern culture so much, but that does sound like something that would happen in Japanese cultures, very much like
Yeah.
kind of respecting the elders, but also kind of keeping, them within there. So it's like it's cool to
Yeah.
see the heart of Nintendo is still there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But it's difficult because when you're a developer and you just join Nintendo, you're very young, right?
And
You see that your boss or your boss's boss is like 75 plus, and you're not gonna get their job, right? Nintendo is not
ever.
growing that crazy. So you'll be at this position for a really long time, right? You have to wait until someone like goes to retirement if that ever happens. But it must be tough. So if they have someone that leaves, do they have the people to continue the culture? It's always the question you have in a studio that has like the strong culture, right?
Indeed. Yeah, Zelda, big fan, obviously, adventures, things of that nature. And then you mentioned multiplayer is kind of one of those things with Pokemon
Yeah.
touched on. So then how I will get into the games that you've been making, which are pretty focused on that. But like what kind of piqued your interest in multiplayer and whether it's PC or FPS or where did all of that because that seems a decent amount of your focus in what you've made
Yeah,
games
yeah,
for.
that's true. That's true. I think I played FPS kind of late. I think the first one was like GoldenEye, but it was like very junky, right? Playing an FPS on console was never that good until
Mhm.
I think probably Medal of Honor or even a Call of Duty probably was like where it felt really good. Halo
Yeah.
as well was a really good one, where they
Yep.
started understanding how to play an FPS game with the controller. But yeah, I started with some FPS like GoldenEye, and I was playing local multiplayer. So it's not something that you find friends from time to time and you play with them, but that's kind of like rare. Then I got my parents got a beefy PC and I managed to play Battlefield
Ah,
1942 on the internet, and that was like really this was mind blowing because you're playing with like 64 other players, and then you have entire forums dedicated to the culture of the game, and like there was not so much talk about meta, but like shortcuts in the map or like
yeah.
good camping spots and stuff. And it was great because you're talking to like a huge amount of people, a huge audience, and you feel like you're part of something. And that's not something you get with like movies probably or music when you go to concerts definitely. But then you kind of like lose touch with those people. So gaming you kind of like keep it for a really long time and you can talk with the same community, make friends as well, and then continue talking with them for years. That's pretty great. So multiplayer was huge for me because of that, because of this like social elements. That also got me to play World of Warcraft, where I,
Ah, you're one. You've done. I've done the same thing. So I've spent. Oh, probably. I made it through Wrath of the Lich King. Is probably about as far as I went. Pretty hardcore.
yeah, me too, me too. I think I went
Okay.
to up to Wrath of the Lich King, but I did a huge pause before. I think I went through the content of like Burning Crusade really quickly, like really, really quickly, and then I was bored. Like until you have the
Yeah.
next. Now we're talking seasons, but back then it was like once a year that you had this like new big update where you had new content, and if you finish the content, not much more for you to do. So yeah, I try to explore more MMOs and try to replicate this like passion that you have with World of Warcraft when you start playing. But it never really managed to be as good, I think. And then
No,
after
they
what?
set the bar pretty high for a while. They really did. Let's.
Yeah,
It kind of
yeah,
gets
yeah.
spoiled when you run around in there. You're like, oh, let me try it. Mm-mm, doesn't it? The magic wasn't there because I tried the same thing a couple times. I was like, oh, I haven't really touched World in a while. Hey, here's a new one. It's just like, no, it's whether you whether you don't excuse me, whether you don't have the time or kind of feel like I've done this before, but I did in World of Warcraft, so I don't need to do it
Yeah.
again. It's hard. It really is.
But it was interesting, I think, for my training, as a game designer or level designer, to understand like it was really a question for me. Is like I tried to play like City of Heroes, it's an American MMO, and there was no loot in the game. Like you don't put stuff on your character to get better and more powerful. And I was like, okay, it's interesting, but
Yeah.
I'm losing such an important part of the game, and it's hard to be into the game for so long because you don't have this like carrots, right? That you always want to get some more stuff. And all the games kind of like I had like small things that they were trying to do different from World of Warcraft, and there was always kind of like a miss. And I realized that yeah, they have a good formula. Trying to change it is maybe not the smartest thing, but if they manage to change something and find something new and great, why not, right? But yeah, didn't manage.
Well, loot's a thing. I mean, I played Diablo on a 75 megahertz, not gigahertz, megahertz computer. Many moons ago. That was like our parents got a PC pretty early, and I was running computer. I mean, my dad had to install Windows from like 78 floppy disks, kind of like those days where it was a bit
Mhm.
ridiculous. Some people don't know what a floppy disk is unless you guys are older. There are
It's
plenty.
the same icon.
Yeah, and it's like, what is that for? Be like, some of us know. No, like you mentioned loot as a thing. It's like thinking about how it started early on, but it is probably the magic they had from Diablo very early, and then World of Warcraft being a strategy game. And we're like, all right, how do we push these two together? And they
Yeah.
kind of found a little bit of magic, but yeah, we are in a game. We are in a very much a state of gaming where loot is kind of a big deal for many different reasons, whether it's microtransactions or collectibles, or is it gear for your character? A bunch of things. Always something to new thing to pick up and find, whether it helps you or not. Sometimes.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
so it's kind of a cool history. Obviously, getting into it. How is there any certain game when you were playing where you're like, how did you make the transition? I guess from gaming to designing, creating, becoming a developer. Is there any game that like steered you down that path? Anything that opened the door that way? How did that transition happen?
Yeah, I think I always kind of knew I wanted to work on games, but in France it was very hard to find any information about how to work in games, right? And it's very similar to how I see armchair developers right now on Twitter, and like you need to be a game developer, but that doesn't really mean anything, and it doesn't really translate to any job in the game industry. And I thought I wanted to do games, so I needed to be a QA tester. There was like you play games all day long, it must be amazing. Like little I knew.
Oh
And
man, yeah.
but then I was always interested in arts, and I was always drawing or painting or sculpting. And when I played, I think it was like Time Splitters 2 on GameCube probably, or PlayStation, I don't remember. They had a map editor, an integrated map editor. So it was on console, and it was pretty janky, but it was very interesting because I could try to make maps and make my friends play through a map, and play tests, really, like you make
Yep.
something in the evening and the next day your friends play it and they give you feedback. And I love doing this. So when I started playing on PC a little bit more, it was more common. You had more map editors on PC than you had on console. So I tried map editing on Company of Heroes, on Far Cry as well, on several games, and it was always very fun. But I didn't really make a career out of modding. It was not really a thing. But at some point, I understood that I had to choose a path in school, right? I had to choose a career. And so I decided to continue with the arts, and I chose a school that had 3D art courses, like a course. So I went through that, and my teacher happened to be one of the first 3D artists at Ubisoft a long time ago.
Wow, that's
And
like
he
couldn't have landed in a better place, it sounds like.
definitely, yeah. It was like super. The guy was not from. He was from my hometown, and we didn't have any game studios. But he was. He worked in Paris. He worked in Montpellier, in Ubisoft studios there, and then he moved back to my hometown and decided to teach there. And yeah, he was telling us how at the beginning they had to write vertices in Notepad and then connect them to and ask a programmer to have a rendering of what they were doing. Like
Yeah.
super crazy stuff, right? And he was very excited about new tools and technology and showing us how easy it is for you guys now.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was
I mean,
very
it's got to be night and day with the tools that developers have. Even just something like, not saying Unreal 5 or Unity are easy to use, but the base that they give you versus nearly everything from scratch has got to be night and day.
definitely, definitely. I think people say it lowered the bar, but I think it's also made it more accessible. So you have people that are more artistic, that you don't need to be so technical to access those things. And if you have a really great artistic eye and you want to build a character, it's much easier when the tools are not an obstacle.
That's actually
That's
a good perspective because I mean that like I mean one that I think back to that I hear about the way the music from Donkey Kong Country was made. Just a whole
Mhm.
bunch of like the little mid-eye sounds and whether they stretched the time or chopped them together, they were able to play a bunch of different songs with very little memory usage, and that's what you say kind of the limitation of the tools sometimes makes you think creative in a different way, but also as you said, having better tools allows somebody who's more artistic instead of technical be able to
Yeah.
put beautiful art into a game. So it's like that's kind of a cool perspective to think about on the other side. I like that. I mean, that's like
Thanks.
again, no, like that's it's good to think from another perspective. It's always good to hear.
It's true, but Evan, like what you're saying about audio, about sound is very, very true because they started with this kind of like dynamic way of making music. So you could have a music that go faster when you have a boss level, or you can rearrange things. And when we started having more options for audio, like actual sound waves and not just like MIDI sounds, it kind of like influenced how people wanted to work because now they wanted to have dynamic music, but that was not a thing in movies or in other things. So they had to develop those tools to kind of like work how they used to, but with a new technology and better sound quality. And in game, I think it was for art it was a bit the same as well. We couldn't ever make characters like we do for movies. I think it's very recent development that we can make very dense characters and all that. But back then we had to create our own tools to put characters in the game.
Yeah, no, it's like can being not on the creative, like artistic, you said you're like, I'm painting, I'm sculpting, I'm drawing and stuff. I'm like, that has never been my forte, so I'm always just kind of impressed on the creative side of
I didn't say I was
things.
good at it. I'm
You
not
got to be
that
good
good at it.
enough to be doing this for a decade. You can't be too bad. Don't sell yourself short.
No, I think the tools allowed me to, especially when you're making maps, when you're making levels, which is kind of like what I started doing and I'm still doing after all those years. It's so much more than just pretty visuals, right? You have to get the gameplay in there. You need to understand how players are feeling when they have like four other players behind them, five in front of them, and they have to, they have to move about. They have to find like the best options to defend the spot or something. It's not so much about art anymore, right? It's
That's
really about
fair.
almost psychology in a way.
Yeah. No, I mean, no, psychology in games now is probably more and more of a thing. Big Destiny
Yeah.
player, obviously, we talked about that a little bit. But from playing a decent amount of Destiny, it's like the psychology of what it's like just to get a headshot on an enemy and just like the feel of things, like the intangible things that where it's whether they go through and tweak an animation to be this little way or that little way, all of those things you said. The psychology of gaming is probably way bigger than most of us probably know, and the psychology of like the internet too, like the way TikTok works and stuff like that. I mean, psychology in technology, that's a weird sentence. Psychology and technology is definitely, I mean, no, that's somebody could probably get a major in that and yeah, go make a career out of that alone, I would imagine now.
Yeah. It's a bit difficult now because we have like those dark patterns, right? Those like UX things that are supposed to make players spend more money or spend more time and feel guilty and they have to come back and this kind of things. And the psychology kind of like goes both ways, right? You can have like how to make a game better for your audience, but also how to make the monetization
I was like,
work
if
better.
you put a pin in that, we will come back to that here later because
Sure.
just from your experience in like different companies and whether it's mobile, whether it's console, like that is, yeah, if we got time, I would love to touch on that a little bit later.
Sure.
Um, so like for the jobs that you've worked in, so you try to do a little bit of, I know just kind of from your background, did you do any QA before you got to development? Did you, and then like, but once
No,
you
no.
started like making levels, like what's the career journey to get you where you are
Yeah,
now?
it's most people I know they started in QA or if they're artists, not necessarily, but designers usually started in QA. No, I got through it somehow. So basically, after I finished my school, I decided to apply, everywhere and anywhere. And the first company that answered me was a company in Poland. So I didn't speak Polish, I didn't speak English, and I
Wow.
just decided, yeah, sure. So I took the first plane. Told my mom I'm going to Poland next week, and I took a plane and I went there. And so I had to learn.
Is that developer still around?
Huh?
Is that developer still around?
No, no. So it was crazy times. It was like just before The Witcher 3 was released, I think, or it was in
Oh,
development. And a lot of developers left CD Projekt and they were like, "Oh, we can make better. We can make our own companies." Um, and making a game, making a company is very different. So the first few companies I worked for, they crash, right? And it's the
oh,
story of game development. Like most companies you will work for, they end up shutting down and no one ever heard of them. But it's okay. You still get to learn, right? And I still had to stuff that I could show to other companies, so it was still good. Yeah,
yeah. And then kind of, so you're in Poland. How long did
yeah.
that last? 3 years, you
So I
said?
was in, yeah, I was in Poland for 3 years. They were looking for a level designer that had some art background because they wanted someone that could place the lighting as well and all yeah. So that's perfect for me. It was great. I was working on a MOBA that was never
Okay.
released, and it was an interesting thing because I never played a MOBA before. League of Legends was just starting. Dota was massive already, and I got to try something I'd never tried before, and I had to make a level for it. And I was like, okay, there are strong codes that you have to adhere. You have to understand those codes. So like playing a lot and also working a lot and talking to people because I was talking with developers like 16 hours a day
Man.
in and out of work, and that's kind of like how I learned to speak English. I learned a little bit of Polish as well, and they were from different backgrounds. Most of them never went to like a game dev school. They come from like the demo scene, right, or programming in banks and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
they came from different background. We had very interesting discussions, and I was working I was talking a lot with programmers and HR people, and they were telling me all those things about their problems that they had as programmers or like recruitment and stuff like this. So it kind of like allowed me to understand the game industry very deeply and very 360 very early on. That was great. And I kept doing this in my jobs after that. So after Poland, I went to Russia for a couple of
Wow.
years. And I was still in between art, design, and tech. We were working on Rainbow Six Siege. That work
Oh,
on
nice. Very
other
cool.
projects. Yeah, so it was interesting because Rainbow Six Siege when it was released was not that great of a success. Like if you remember, the game was like
Oh, yeah.
had like bad reviews. It was a bit janky. They had a lot of like technical problems and bugs. The game was very complex, and so they decided to outsource the entire live operation of the game in the first few seasons to our team in Russia.
Oh, wow.
And in my team, I had esport players of Rainbow Six Siege. They were like some of the best champions in the world,
Oh,
and they saw the game very differently from like a newbie. But at the same time, they were developers, and it was interesting because they understood that stuff that works for esport players might not be great for new players, and we had to find a balance constantly between hardcore players and still the need to bring new players to keep the machine running, right?
like that's got to be one of the toughest things, honestly, for any game. The balance of
Yeah,
like, I don't want to say casual because that's the wrong word, but as you said, like newer players, less experienced, unused to whether it's a franchise, the mechanics, whatever it may be, to, as you said, esport, elite, top
yeah.
0.01% kind of thing. It's like, how do you balance a game between those? So you said,
It's
I was
super
going to ask you,
difficult
yeah.
because yeah, you have like matchmaking and this kind of thing to kind of like separate populations, but even the way the weapons feel, the way you move, the way the new gadgets are introduced in Rainbow Six, you had to make something that was still accessible for new players. So after you have like I don't know 20 or 30 operators, it becomes kind of complex, right? And which one you choose first, and understanding what happens to you when someone just kills you from behind a wall, and you had no idea there was someone there. So this is the kind of thing that's super hard to do. I think in general, games that are trying to appeal to like the broadest audience is really hard because you always end up disappointing 90% of your audience to please the 10%. It's really difficult.
No, that's Yeah, I mean, if you take a second out as a gamer and just be like, oh, well, why can't this be there? And it's like you are
Yeah,
one tiny sliver of this giant bell curve. It's like, and a lot of it is going to be in the middle. Whether you're like brand new, there's a lot of medium players, and then there's going to be some elites. Like, which ones do you aim to make happy?
yeah, yeah.
Probably for the population base, it's going to be somewhere in the middle of the giant bell curve, I would imagine. But when it comes to
It's
like, go ahead, sorry.
it's tough because you also, as a player, you don't have access to the kind of data that they see as developers. So, like, I had a random example that popped in my head, but like the strategy game, Anno
Yeah.
1800, this game happened to have like 50% of their players are from China. The game has like really never really been marketed in China.
Hmm.
You never see Chinese players, on forums or anything because obviously they have their own forums. So you don't really expect that they would do something to please this audience. But it's a huge audience, right? But as a player, you don't see that. And same for like, more like broad audience games, like a game like Fortnite. You would
Oh,
see a lot of hardcore players talking about the game, but you won't see really the people that are playing an hour a week or 2 hours a week, and that those might be the actual mass behind the actual mass that spends money. So yeah, sometimes developers make decisions. I'm like, I'm not the target, and that's okay. I hope they make the money they want from that.
that's sometimes what you have to do as a player is be like, I have to understand this decision is not for me. For
Yeah,
any other chunk of the player base, whether it's for go really nitty gritty about like a reticle design about something, or you know, as you said, much more of the population you don't even think about, the one who play
I
1 to 2 hours a week.
World of Warcraft taught me this thing early on that the game will change over the course of its lifetime, and sometimes it will change to something you don't really want as a player. And you're like, okay, I'm not the target audience anymore, And I think that happens to a lot of games. I see League of Legends or Dota, and those games are incredibly hard to try now for the first time. You're gonna get insulted, left and right because you don't understand the game unless you spend like 8 hours watching every single video, and it's still gonna be probably bad,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's like, I mean, it's huge to know. Yeah, some games are just designed for the elite. Some, and again, as a designer on your side as well, it's like, who do you want to? It's like you are still going to be part of a business. You are going to be part of a company who is trying to make money to keep the doors open and the lights on, so you can keep doing what you do. And then you turn around and be like, the best people to sell this to is a wide audience if possible, and how we can make that. I mean, Rainbow Six Siege has got to be one of the rare success stories. It's like Destiny has probably succeeded in spite of itself at times. Rainbow Six Siege has a very long, still going success story of like a game, as you said, didn't have the greatest of launch. Ubisoft, between that and I'm trying to think, For Honor, they have had such long tail support for those two titles specifically. It's been really interesting to watch. Yeah, it's like when it comes to when we jump in, I kind of want. It's like I want to get into level design because you're sitting there talking about Rainbow Six Siege, and I'm sitting there going, okay, not even to think about just a map in general, but Rainbow Six Siege has to be a different animal because it's not just an arena like Halo or Destiny or anything else. Like Battlefield's going to be a little bigger, but it's like Rainbow Six Siege, as you said, the destructible environments change everything about that. So it's like if you know, and now as you said with the tools and stuff that you get to, it's like, so when you go to build a level for Rainbow Six Siege, you did that for a little while. It's like this is kind of what spurred the whole interview in the first place, was what is it like to build a level? And this is kind of one of the main pieces I want to get to, is like, because you broke the thread down really well to know you've got a lead artist and a lead designer, you've got the gray box piece to go through, and I'm just bad summation here so you can go into more detail in a second. And then as it goes through multiple teams and testing and stuff like that, um, it was kind of an eye-opening piece to know the number of people that would be involved in one map. And
Yeah.
then if you think about, hey, how many maps is somebody going to be putting out? Or if you put out 12 maps, are they going to get the same quality and polish? Is your studio designed for that? Are you made for other things? All of those pieces go into it. So those will be other questions we'll get to. But to start, like,
Yeah.
just kind of curiosity, since you have been doing it for so long, what is it like to, I mean, Rainbow Six Siege is perfect. It's an arena. It's different than just an arena because you have starting locations and stuff, but your exterior, interior, defense, and offense. So it's like kind of a different one than just a combat arena like Halo, for example. But
Yeah.
still, what is the design? What is the process like to say, all right, we're going to launch a new level with this, next release that we're going to do? How does that even happen?
Yeah, it's a long process. And one thing I didn't even mention on Twitter is the process that happens before, when you choose what kind of environment you're going to make, what kind of country the map is set in, because every map is set in a different country. And so it starts, I think, from marketing, where they see that, you know, they have a huge population of players in Brazil, and they're like, oh, it'd be great if we made a map set in Brazil. So they would send, you know, surveys, and we had like a few options. We made some concept arts. There was an option for like a football stadium. There was an option for a favela, and there was another one that was like, I don't remember what was the third one. I think it was like in the city center of like a rich place. And as a developer, I expected the favela to be the least chosen, the least favorite, because it's kind of like showing the bad side of the country.
Yeah.
But Brazilian players just loved it. They were like,
Really?
favela, yes, we want to shoot people in favela. That's like the best thing ever. So that's how it came to be. And we made this. We started making a map in favela in this way. And all the maps kind of like start this way, with kind of like a marketing, a goal, a kind of like a target audience in a way, but not really, because the rest of the world is the main audience.
Yeah.
So yeah, it started like this, and then the main problem with Rainbow Six Siege is that, yes, it's an arena, but it's an arena with a goal. So you have a bomb, or you have to defuse, or you have a hostage, and because you can start from anywhere around the map, or at least you can walk around the map to attack, you have infinite path through the map. Defenders can be placed anywhere, they can put traps anywhere. So you don't really have like the lanes concepts, or kind of like directions like you would have in Counter-Strike. And it's not random like you would have in a deathmatch, you know, setting. So it's very tricky. You have to think about, you know, that there's not one at least one path that is way overpowered, or maybe it's the obvious one, so that's what defenders are going to defend first. So it's difficult. And also, one thing is that we had a few maps before, so we had like, I think the game was released with like 10 maps, and each of them were trying to do something different. So we're not trying to make the best map ever every time, and that was like the biggest misconception with players.
Okay.
They're like, oh, this map sucks, it's so much worse, you know, than X map. And I'm like, yeah, but we're not trying to make the best map ever. We're trying to make different flavors, different things. This map is huge, this map is small, this map has several levels, this map is chaotic, this one is very organized, and the goal is just to give different things for players. Casual players, they love that. You know, it's every time they play, it's a little bit different, and they love this. Hardcore players, they want to find the best meta for every map, and some maps have a meta that sucks because there's millions of players playing millions of hours, and we can't play this that much,
of course not.
realistically, right? So yeah, they found stuff like on day one, you know, that's like ruining the game. Like, how?
That's got to be one of the hardest pieces to say. I mean, yeah, I've heard that quote. It's like, you do all the testing you want. You put it in a million players' hands. Like, just start counting the millions of hours played just by the minute. It's just, it counts up crazy. And as you
Like,
said,
oh, if I sit here and I jump 7 times and open the menu, and I shoot at the same time, then you know, I go through the ground, and you're like, how? Why would you do that?
that's some of the stuff I want at the same time. And it's like, I feel like those people need to be QA testers, because they're the ones who actually know how to break a game. Because I wonder, it's like, because there are times people find bugs in any random number of games. Like, I mean, recent stuff in like Diablo, for example. It's like, how are you trading stuff between like different servers? Like, I wouldn't even think that's possible, and somebody goes and figures it out and all that stuff. I'm like, so when you're saying, yeah, it's like, so jumped a couple times, throw a bomb here, you can shoot yourself over here on the top. Like, how are you here? You shouldn't even be here. So that's kind of one of those. So when you're going through the design process, though, it's like, so I mean, you've got kill volumes where obviously you can't go outside the map. Typically, you're trying to avoid those types of things. Under the map, again, is you're like, okay, you shouldn't be down there. When you're as you said, it's like, that's kind of a cool thing to think about as well. I'm going to make a reference to Destiny for a second here, just because of what they've talked about recently. Joe Blackburn literally put out his tweet on just the PvP maps that they've been working on. And they'd cycled out of making PvP maps for a couple of years. It had been a thing. Everybody's kind of aware. And at this point, now they had been kind of reprising maps that they had into like the new version of the engine. So the polish, the lighting, the work it takes to kind of the lift to get it into the new version. But also we've got one new map per year. And as you said, is a perfect example, and that's kind of what he mentioned as well, is like, one map can't be the jack of all trades, but they were trying to make maps that would be. So again, it's like nobody really ends up liking them. So as you said, it's like, these aren't all going to be the best maps, but as you said, some are chaotic, some are strategic, some are very linear, some are going to be open, one's a giant kill box, whatever it may be. When you have different maps for different purposes, and that's why it's like for Destiny, it's like they mentioned they were going to work on a map pack, and I'm like, so they can have different maps for different purposes, and that fits perfectly, as you said, because you could make one long, you know, maybe you have a map with a couple different train cars versus like one multi-story house. So verticality or length, width, and however you think about so Okay, so you've got Brazil, you've got a couple concepts, and then you said the favela was designed. So then is it like at that point, so the marketing kind of information steered almost what type of map you were going to design. Then how do you get to like how many floors do you put in the house? Like how many rooms? How do you get to that nitty-gritty process? Is that go for it?
It depends. I think every map was kind of like different. Once I remember we had like a prototype of like a 3-floor design, and it ended up not working for the kind of map we were doing. But we were like, we kind of liked it, so we tried to kind of like repurpose it for the next one, and we were trying, let's try to make the most vertical map possible and see how it plays. And sometimes it's fun, sometimes you just don't get it or it's not fun. In Rainbow Six, it's kind of like slow to climb up floors, and sometimes when you get down, it's kind of hard to get back up. You kind of get stuck sometimes if you're at the end of a match and you have to climb back up. It's like a pain in the ass, especially if you're a defender. So it's really like die and retry a lot for a lot of things. We play tested all the time. So we had always 3 maps in development at the same time. We had one in pre-production, so we were doing the concepts, we were doing a blockout, a gray box to see the feel. We had one that was like in full production, so we were locking down rooms, making sure that this one works really well. Trying to find, we had 2 rooms that were too similar, so people couldn't have callouts saying I'm the red room.
That's
The guy's like,
okay.
I'm in the red room, I don't see you. So you have to kind of like find different things to differentiate them. So that's like the full production, right? And then we had one that was in debugging stage and like intense QA testing. Also for performance to make sure that the map runs perfectly in every spot. So we had those 3 maps always in development, mostly the same team, but spread around those 3 maps. So we had one designer that was like in charge, owning the map. He was like the owner of the map. And as the map kind of like moved toward production, we were adding more level designers to support, to take care of each of the little like nitty-gritty details in the maps, like the volumes, for example, or making sure that there's no invisible collision, because you had the character, but you also had the drones that are very small, and you make sure
Oh,
everything
yep.
moves. So yeah, a lot of things. And in like the end of production, the debugging, usually level designers are not needed. The map is like locked, so you shouldn't really change
Okay.
anything. We had artists, we had QAs, and we had technical artists that were making sure that the map was running well. So it's spread out, and we try to shuffle around. So one of those was in charge of a map will not be in charge of the next one, so someone else will be in charge, and this kind of things. So yeah, that's kind of like the organization of a map.
Okay. So you've kind of got some like a lead, whatever. If you probably the wrong
Yeah.
title with a project like a map lead or something, somebody's going to run it. And then you mentioned like the gray box, and kind of on the Twitter thread is where it started. You had like the lead artist, and then also kind of like those are kind of starting just the rough concept, like walls are here kind of thing. Like how does so what are the steps? You've got like the gray box, and then you said like art came in, and then you've got the once the artists are there, then you've got the actual like once the design, and then once you feel like so I guess I'm trying to ask how early do testers get in there in the process? Because are they testing even the gray box to be like, can we run around in this thing and this feels bad, this feels good? Is it that early you get in before you even start putting textures there?
Oh yeah. We had internal testers. At least we had, and our QAs were very senior people. We were very lucky. We had amazing QA team. We had QA engineers as well that were running automated tests and this kind of things. And we were trying to bring everyone as early as possible. So even artists were working in a different map. They would play test, this
Okay.
this map, and we were trying. We play testing the 3 maps that were in development every single day. So we were playing a hell of a lot of our game. We were not playing the game outside work anymore because that was just too much of a good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone was involved and everyone was really aware of how things were going. And sometimes there's just a map you don't like. As a lead artist, there was a lot of people that were coming to me and were like, "Oh, this map is too dark," and I'm like. Yeah, that's kind of like the theme, right? So we were making a map. It was like a horror themed, like a horror house kind of thing, and it was like it was the theme, right? Then we had to actually turn the lighting up because everyone was complaining. It's just
Everybody
us.
complained. Yeah.
Like every player we play tested was like, it's too dark. We can see shit. We hate it. We're like, okay, sorry, my bad. But yeah, it's sort of like tries and retries. Like I know a lot of American companies, they have like those more auteur kind of way. You know, when you have like The Last of Us, you have Druckmann that is like, this is the game. It's always going to be like this, and
Yeah.
it's very hard to counter those kind of people because they're usually right, and that's
It's like somebody who has like a vision. They know what it is. Now it's like the successful ones, as you said, Druckmann,
yeah.
Santa Monica with God of War has done some pretty amazing
Yeah.
ones. But as you said, it's like somebody still has to hold the vision, even if you're like, hey, it needs to be this, darker house theme. That's what it's going for. There's a balance, like turn it up, and you're like, there's a point where you're like, there's, as you said, the lead has to be like, well, we want some thematic difference to fit in with whether it's the expansion you're going with or what you're going for. So
I didn't have the experience that those guys have. So when you have the entire community that says it's too dark, I will, I will
yeah,
change it,
all
right?
right, fine, turn the switch on. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty
um,
much.
when it
Yeah.
comes to, so you get the gray box part. When it comes to just even setting those pieces up and then transitioning to art, what would you say is the hardest part? Would you say like getting the lighting right, like making sure the textures feel like lived in? What piece of the transition to, all right, I have walls that feel okay. How do we
Mhm.
make this like fit? What do you feel like to get it to start looking real and like something you want to play in? What's the hardest piece of that, in your opinion? Again, everybody's probably got a different thought.
I think every game is trying something different. So on Rainbow Six, the main problem was to make sure that every wall and floor was readable. So if you can shoot through it, you don't have a prompt. You don't have anything that tells you this will, you can shoot bullets through it and it will explode. So we had to make sure that everything was like crystal clear. And if there was any doubt, it was over. So we had like rules that we kind of like developed by ourselves, like concrete walls. They're too close to plaster walls, and it's not clear whether it's concrete or plaster in different kind of lighting scenarios, or if your monitor sucks. So that's the kind of thing. So we tried to make a lot more wooden things. And because of
Okay.
that, it also influenced the kind of maps we could make. Because if you're supposed to make like a construction site and you have wooden walls, it's kind of a bit awkward. So we had to find like when at the very early stages when we were deciding how we were making the map, I was bringing all this information, with the designer. We were discussing together what kind of thing would be extremely hard to do, and we were trying to not make things too hard for us. We're trying to go for like we had so many ideas of so many maps. We kind of chose the easiest ones because we had a timeline that was so tight, right? The players were expecting a map, we had to deliver, so making something too difficult was not interesting for us.
So as you're going through that process, some are easy, some are difficult. Were you ever able to kind of let one marinate for a little while? As you said, three were kind of ongoing. Is it always three in the cycle? Was there ever one that you could like that got extra time? As you said, it was a more difficult one to design, but was kind of not as much of a priority while you may have worked on others and then eventually got to do the difficult one? Did that ever pan out, or did you get to do that?
That I don't think so. I think we had some maps where when we started designing it, we were like, this idea is really cool. Players are gonna love it, but it's gonna take a little bit more time. So we were trying to arrange everything to make sure we could have like an extra designer, an extra artist, to work on a map. But it's very difficult because it's not because you add or you double the amount of artists that you're gonna make the map twice faster, right?
True.
So it's always very very delicate. Usually the predictions are wrong. Even if when you made 10 maps, it's still difficult to plan perfectly everything. You might have people that get sick, you might have a global pandemic, you might have a lot of things you don't
Yeah,
know.
nobody plans for that one. Promise. Nobody knew that
Yeah,
was
so
coming. So
it's too difficult to plan for the best. And when you're putting things more difficult for yourself, it's very risky. And if you finish tight on the previous map, making something bigger is very dangerous. So we always have to like balance that.
that's again important because you're like, I still have to get a job done and deliver to Ubisoft. Say, here's the new map for
Yeah,
your expansion. And you're like, okay, it got panned out, it did well, as opposed to, yeah, we didn't finish it in time, we tried too hard, and they're like, not going to be too happy about that one. So
yeah,
how?
yeah.
So you okay? So you were working on three maps at the same time with that team that you were working on, kind of the live content. How big was just the? How big was like the QA artists, leads? Like how big was that team? How many?
I think we were about, if I'm not mistaken, we had like seven designers. We had 30 artists in-house, and we had more that were working as vendors or outsourcing. And we had, I team of very, very senior QA. It was about, I think there were 6 people, I think, if I remember correctly. And then we had, a lot of like more junior QAs. And Ubisoft had their own QA team in Kiev, in Bucharest. So yeah, it was a lot of QAs, and still never enough.
No, yeah, it's like there's never enough because as soon as you put it in the player's hands, you're like, all right, now we've not done enough. But
Yeah.
that's a lot just to sit there and make 3 maps. Like, as I know it's a cycle, but it's like the process of going through that. You said 7 to 8 designer, 30 artists is.
Yeah,
I
at
mean,
least, yeah.
that's so. I mean, okay, so are there? Obviously, there has to be some like lighting specialist or textures or just kind of more world design. Because I mean, some of Rainbow Six is not an arena; it's the exterior stuff. Or you've got Skybox, I guess, as well. So like, even you say 30 artists, how does that even get divided up? I'm curious.
So we had a lighting artist after the first map. We had a lighting artist mostly because the lighting system was very difficult to master and took a long time to implement. Like you had to carefully craft some volumes for where the light can be or cannot be. Make sure that if there is 2 lights that are in the same screen. So if you're in a corridor, you're staying in the corridor, and you see 2 light sources, then it might like double the performance
Oh,
cost. And it's like, so we had like, it was so tidy,
whew.
And once you have something that is placed, like you don't touch anything anymore, it's like, it's perfect. So that was because it was very complex, and we had this the one lighting specialist. She was really great, and we had I was doing a lot of the textures mostly after work. But we had a texture artist that joined in and was the kind of like dedicated texture artist. And then everybody else was a bit more generalist. We had 2 main categories of art. We had the architecture, so walls, floors, everything. You have it's a lot of texturing work and modeling work to make sure everything is like really neat for the architecture. And then we had props artists, so those are making like statues and flower pots and all this kind of things. This kind of thing you can usually outsource to external studios.
Are those the ones that, so if you source those externally and then bring them in, are you able to, do they work with you guys to place them? Or are you just like, I need you to make some pots and these things, other things, and you're like, conceptually, you're like, kind of want to put it there. I just need somebody to make it. Is that what their purpose mostly would be for outsource?
Yeah, usually the outsourcing studios are not even in the same country. They're going to be in a cheaper country because executives want to save money as much as possible. So you outsource that, and they will have like a carefully crafted list of things to make with usually a block out or a block mesh of what the thing should look like. And I think especially single player games, they rely heavily on outsourcing. Like 90% or 95% of the art is outsourced.
Oh,
There was like, I think about 5 or 7 years ago, there was a lot of GDC talks and podcasts about artists that are explaining how this is all changing because games became so big
yeah.
that they had to outsource most of the work. And that was dramatic for a lot of people that they love to build props, they love to build art, and then suddenly they're just told you're going to manage 50 artists in China, and that was not what they signed up for, and that was very difficult. I think it still is difficult. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it kind of it turns off the creative brain, it turns on the analytical. I mean, it's a different part of your brain, even at that point, that somebody's like, I wanted to be an artist, this is what I want to do. And now you've put somebody in a manager that they didn't even want to do that in the first place. And they're like, well,
Yeah.
you can do this and manage a team, or, I guess it's at that point, I guess you can choose what you want to go
It's
do.
still
But
creative in a way, but it's more like an architect creative, right? So it's like
okay.
you're designing something, you're imagining, oh, we want this kind of flower pot, should look like this because it's going to make a great composition. Then you don't make it yourself.
Yeah.
Someone else is making it. So it's still creative in a way that you imagine, you conceptualize things, but then you receive them and then you place them in the world, and it's not the same kind of thing. I think it's less technical. It's more, yeah, it's just you just keep the creative part and you don't do any of the actual work in a way,
Yeah.
manual work, let's say.
But again, like, I mean, as you said, at 50, an architect is actually a pretty good way to say that. The architect kind of building the frames and things, and somebody's going to make the objects that you're going to put into the game. But for one person to sit there and make all those different objects, that's a lot of time, as you said, and especially if you're under a time deadline. How do you do that? Are time deadlines, like, that's a real thing? I mean, whether it's and live service content even more is very much that way, whether you're on a set schedule, whether you've got seasons, whether you do expansions. There always seems to be a looming deadline for just about anything that anybody's going to do anymore, without a question. But I was going to say, it's like, just on a broad scope, where are you in just watching the world of kind of the tip towards live service, where there has to
Mhm.
be this continuous push? Because you hear about, I don't know what it takes to make games like Fortnite or Genshin Impact. It's like some of the teams and the work hours and things of that nature. Like I know you said you were like, I was making a little bit outside of normal hours and stuff, where
Mhm.
it's the balance of, what countries allow what hours to work, which ones are you going to do on your own? There's the whole talk about crunch, but just in general, like the tip towards live service, do you see that as, where do you see that as for the industry, just from your outside perspective?
I think the main problem with live service is that management has not evolved for that kind of things, right? So for literally decades, we were building a game and then it was like packaged and shipped, and you never have to think about it again. So you can delay as much as you want, usually, unless you have like financial pressure from a
Yeah.
publisher. But it allows you to kind of like polish the game a little bit more. Now, when you have like very tight deadlines, it's very difficult to use the same management techniques that we used before. So if your studio doesn't adapt to those management techniques and build something new, literally everything from the ground up, building new things, it's not going to work. And then when you have like a shipped product, you see like Star Citizen, this kind of games, scopes, balloons, it
Yep.
becomes very complex to work with stuff that you built 7 years ago because everything changed in meanwhile. So I think management has always been a huge issue in the game industry. But as games get more complex and bigger, it becomes way more problematic. When you have live on top of a game that's already complex, and a huge audience that want different things, and management that wants different things from the publishing team. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Oh no,
it's really
100. That's yeah. The whole publishing piece is for sure. No, man. I mean, and again, that's also not a job I envy either, because as you said, they're trying to make decisions for trying to make 6 different people happy, whether it's a board, whether it's the consumers, shareholders, trying to make teams not work 7,000 hours in a day, kind of thing, but also still try and deliver products that they promised. It is interesting to watch from a player's perspective, because a lot of us as players are like gamers, especially now with the access to the internet, YouTube videos, like much to blame here, guides of how to solve things. Content is chewed through so quickly, especially
Mhm.
in, take like Destiny, for example, or Fortnite. It's like, hey, here's how to solve this puzzle. It's like, it's been out for an hour. What are you doing to me? Um, like that's I got to play Remnant 2 recently. Fantastic game, loved it. I got to review it, so I got to play some before the internet got to dissect it. So there's certain puzzles you go through and figure out on your own, but then you turn around and I'm like, you could, I swear, like 2 hours after the game, the wiki is just like, here's how to do everything in the game. So it's like, um, it's hard to keep up, and it's sometimes it's really nice as a player, because we have this like like this year for gaming alone is
Mhm.
ridiculous, because of so many large, small, good games on a spectrum, and we're not even done with the year yet. We're about to hit this piece that's coming up with the new season of Destiny, Immortals of Avium. You've got Armored Core 6,
Yeah.
Starfield's coming, and then Sea of Stars is after my own heart with the Chrono Trigger type stuff. Like Sea of Stars,
Yeah.
do you know? Have you seen Sea of Stars at all?
No,
Um,
I haven't been able to see
okay,
much.
you just like growing up with. I never played Final Fantasy. Chrono Trigger's like my RPG of heart.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
Sea of Stars is kind of after that as well. So that's one like I want to like carve out a little bit of time for, but it's crazy right now. So it's like there's a balance of, this is, I swear, the year where COVID has just kind of delayed everything enough to dump it all into this year. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
games. So you've got the balance of like live service who want to live on, and then you've got a bunch of players, depending on what games are coming out or not, that don't have enough time to play as much as it is.
Yeah.
So when it comes to whether it's managers or even just the financial decisions, trying to phrase this question correctly. It's, have you like, because now it's, I mean, now it sounds like you're kind of working on starting a company. If you've like worked in consulting and stuff like that on the higher end, when it gets to the decisions of fun versus money,
Yeah. Yeah.
that boardroom, that like top level discussion, like how much of those have you been involved in? And it's like, when it comes to, well, the player's gonna have fun, but we need to make money. But as like the where, how do you, from what you've seen, is like, how are those discussions, and like to try and meet in the middle? Is like, as the game designer over here, I want the best game in the world. The people over here, like, I want to make the most money possible. And is there some like, how does that all go just on that? Because I mean, nobody who
So,
works at a current company that can tell me how that goes, but just like from the past witnessing or seeing people above you deal with that, how's that been?
I'm very happy with my career because I got to be in production, in deep into production, get my hands dirty and also see how it works, a little bit higher level, but it's really outside. That's the kind of thing. Like for my entire career, most of my career, I've been completely blindsided. I had no idea why decisions were made like this, and very often developers learn about decisions about their game from news, from journalists, or the PR department put out some message and they didn't know about it internally. And it's such like a divide, right, between the development team and whoever makes decision about the audience, the target audience, the deadlines, these kind of things, the promises that are made. We're mostly blind, and it's only when I worked at Tencent that I got to see a little bit more how those decisions are made, and they're made in a very smart way, right? When you have the information, when you see the data, you see the information, and they tell you this game will be canceled, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. It was bleeding a million, a week. Yeah, definitely, that makes sense. But developers tend to be like, oh no, why are you canceling my game? It's such a great game, and they will not really explain. They will just say, no, we're canceling your game, and it feels, when you're
That's
just
gotta
an
feel
artist, or
awful. Like,
yeah, you don't see that kind of things, especially if it's like a failure of like your creative director, your producer. They didn't manage to make a game that was matching expectations of players, and they won't tell you that the publishers, or they're supposed to be the one communicating those kind of information down to the team. But if they're at fault, they might not do that. So yeah, it's very difficult. It's really two different worlds are making different decisions for different ways. And usually people that are in investments or publishing, they never made a game themselves, right? Because that's not the skills you ask from them. You ask them to understand, market shares and all these kind of things.
totally different talent set right there. Yeah.
It's different things, right? Everybody is really specialized as well. So in publishing teams, you will have someone that's like dedicated for social media, for like all different kind of things. So yeah, I think the industry is a little bit too big, and this lack of transparency is what I was trying to fight with my Twitter thread. Is like players will imagine everything. Like if you remember, if you played Zelda Ocarina of Time, like there was so many rumors about this game. Like if you stand in this place and do this song, then you will see the true ending. This kind of players imagine things, right? So when they have like this cryptic PR message and they're trying to find the real reason of what's behind it, I totally understand it.
Yeah.
Developers do the same, they get a cryptic message down from publishing. They're trying to understand, like, did we do something wrong? Is the company going to shut down? That's like, I swear, I heard that at every single company I was working for. Developers one day getting a weird email, like weirdly phrased email, and they're like, are we going to shut down? Should I look for a job? And it's usually like benign stuff. It's not
Yeah.
happening. But it's like we have no idea. It's not transparent at all. I think it's hurting the industry
No,
a
I mean
lot.
that's I mean reading between the lines on anything like that is like, why is this not whatever? I mean, reading between the lines for an email for you, especially to know if you have a job, totally can change maybe your mentality of like when you come into work the next day. Are you excited to work on it, or are you like, is this thing like
Yeah,
nibbling at the back of your brain to know, do I need to stay extra hours? And that's, I guess, where it also, as you said, there's been this push about crunch in the past 5 years, probably, maybe a little more. I mean, for a long time, forever, like on the inside, I'm sure, for hours that people would work. And creatives especially tend to put in more hours than you probably should, depending on what you're going for, just because like you're passionate about something and it's like maybe for you. But then if you're like a lead and you're doing that, then what does that look like to people who report
yeah,
to you on the way down? When it comes to that type of stuff, it's tough. But no, as you said on the gamer side, it's like, is there the secret thing? I mean, you mentioned Ocarina of Time. At one point, I swear I saw a picture of what the camera looked like for that game, and it is bizarre. Do you ever see? Have you seen what that? Because it's like the way they do, like as you turn, you have like the camera and kind of the world, but then there's like this ring of what the like I guess the skybox looks like, and then the
yeah,
camera's in a certain place to be able to see that. But just it looked so weird when I saw it the first time. See, as you said, like the tricks and stuff that you pull to get things off
yeah,
the ground
yeah,
is got to be. Sometimes you're just like, it works, don't touch it. And that's as you said about that lighting thing. Sometimes you get to a point where you're like, don't touch it, it's not
yeah,
broken.
yeah.
Um,
It happens all the time. Like we always find like some tricks to do what we wanted to do, and the engine was not supposed to do that. Like there's this super famous, I think it was on Twitter as well, like a few years ago, where someone from I think it was Fallout team, I was showing that there was a train in one of the I think it was
oh
Fallout
yeah,
3.
yeah.
and they didn't had any way to move something in the game. It was not a character, so they added it as a hat
Yep.
for the character, and then they made the character run super fast under the map, and that was like the hat that was moving around. That was a train, and that kind of things happen all the time. But yeah, it's like this kind of things. It might be a programmer that is like super creative that came up with this solution. But if you always have this like looming threat of your head, you don't
Yeah.
want to put this kind of like extra effort or like crazy thought. You might not be in the right headspace to make this kind of imaginative solution.
No,
Yeah.
thinking way outside of the box on that one, quite literally. No, the financial piece is weird because I mean, you said you're. So I guess kind of talk about as I read through like your later part in your career because you worked at, you got to see Tencent and then you also got to. There's one other one I'm trying to. I mean,
NetEase games as
NetEase,
well.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like as well. Um, I mean, sometimes from like the Western side, it's like they wonder about those companies for different reasons.
That's exactly why I worked there. I was so curious about, and when I was at Ubisoft, we were talking about China all the time. That's where I learned about this fact about Ano, that 50% of players were from China. They didn't understand why, they didn't understand what they found about, industrial era British,
You're like,
especially
what is?
RTS. It's not an RTS game, it's like a chill strategy game. They were like,
Yeah.
that's not our target and what they're playing. And they were talking about China all the time. And I was like curious. And NetEase contacted me and were like, hey, do you want to work in Shanghai? And I was like, sure, why not? I was super curious. I was interested in what they were doing. And they had a massive amount of people. They were. I don't know how many thousands of developers were working there, and basically they were having trouble with the Chinese government. The Chinese government didn't want to release new games. They were like, "Ah, it's like opium of the people. We don't want young players to be influenced by games, so they're
Well,
not
they
going to
redo
release
that
any license."
laws recently. They were trying to like limit gaming. Was that China doing that?
Oh, every year there's new laws about limiting games or anything, but here it was
Okay.
more like an ideological problem. They were like,
Oh,
people are playing too much games and games are not adding anything to the country, so they decided not to allow new licenses. And NetEase, Tencent, massive companies, they were in a pickle. They had to find new sources of revenue. So NetEase decided to turn their internal projects toward more external projects. They were interested in how can we make games for the rest of the world, the Western market. So I was there to kind of like help them understand how to make games that are not only mobile but can be cross-platform and PC, console as well, and that could be interesting for the rest of the world. And they had really talented developers, but just because their industry is so new in a way, and they don't really have this understanding of how to build large-scale games, they're still building games with smaller teams, so a lot of smaller teams, but
okay.
they don't really have this like scale. And yeah, that was very interesting. Got to see a very different way of building games. Really, really different.
Yeah. So it's like, I mean, you mentioned a lot of mobile games and things of that nature, but also trying to get that mobile. It's like, I mean, Genshin would be a massive one that's success from
Um,
at least like over there for sure. And they have a couple new ones and stuff like that. And you said thousands of developers, but like, how small are the team? Are they working on individual like projects themselves as opposed to trying to collaborate together to, as you said, make a mobile game versus like a console game? You need a bigger team for that. Is that what you were
mhm.
trying to almost transition? Be like, all right, let's take multiple teams. Were you trying to collaborate into one bigger project so you could actually like stretch it out to a console level development team kind of thing?
There's also like a scope problem, right? Because if you're used to work with teams of like 30, 40, 50 people maximum, trying to build a game, that's the scale of, I don't know, yeah, The Last of Us or God of War, where you have like hundreds of people working together, plus hundreds of outsourced studios working with you, it requires like a different way of scoping your project. You want to try something bigger, but you also need to have something to say. Because if you're building like a match 3 game, you can't really build bigger
Yeah, that's true.
unless you try to build a campaign or something, but it's not that big. But suddenly you're trying to build something huge. You need to have something to say. You need to have like a bunch of levels that are progressing the story in a meaningful way. It's very, very difficult to go from. It's almost like a different industry, right? And
Sounds like it. Yeah. I mean, if yeah, as you said, like mobile games are just short interactions versus, as you said, trying to make somebody wants to sit down and play a console game for even a couple of hours feels different than a mobile game for a couple of minutes. I mean,
yeah,
as you
yeah, yeah.
said, so when you go to scope versus, but the why is huge. Like that for them, that had to be a massive change to like, why are you like, what's the more than just like, hey, I want to match 3 or whatever, like the very simple mobile games can be, or like there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them versus trying to make something bigger. Yeah, that
But they have expertise in big games like they made a lot of MMOs that were very, very successful. So
okay.
those are big games, but they started small and then they built up around them to make them massive. But the core of the game that was built maybe 10 or 15 years ago as a browser game, right? That was like pretty small. Then they built around it and now they're like massive projects with thousands of developers on them. But it's different when you have to start a new one from scratch.
Yeah.
You know, you can't come to the market with like a game that's like a fraction of World of Warcraft, right? You have like a
Yeah.
bar that you have to build something that's already huge, and that's very tricky.
I mean, that's kind of one of those when you said you were worried like the government didn't want to, have more licensing and other things. Also, like the financial commitment to make something bigger. You said like World of Warcraft, if you're going to make an MMO from scratch, that is a massive commitment and stuff. And depending on where the funding come from and stuff like that, the approval process has got to be all sorts of not fun, I would
Yeah,
imagine.
it's risky. It's huge risks, right? So it's for Chinese companies, it's very common to put 2 or 3 teams of 50 people working on exactly the same project. And then they're just going to take the one that works best
Oh wow.
and maybe solidify the team that's working on the two that didn't work out into the one that works well. And that's something you can do when when you want to minimize risks, right? There's a lot of solutions that you can do like this to minimize risks. It increases your overall cost because you're developing 3 times the same game,
Yeah.
but you're kind of sure that something is going to work, or at least you can combine. So that's what I said. It's a very different way of developing games,
No.
but it works out sometimes, right? So it might not be a bad solution. It's just that when you're trying to build something that's like 500 people, you can't afford to put 3 times 500
No, you
people.
can't. Yeah, you got that's where I mean that's where as you said like the vision, the why, there has to be a couple short list of people that lead that type of thing because the vision for the Cory Balrogs, your Neil Druckmann's, the big like your huge visionaries coming up, Todd Howard to
Mhm.
see how Starfield launches, like some like probably eccentric visionary, they're going to have some uniqueness to them, but it's like to get to that level, to have that much authority over a team of like 500 people, it's like there's a lot of groundwork, as you said, to get there from starting in QA and then designing and getting up there. And then now you're doing like consulting and stuff. And then you're working on, you said you're stealth doing a studio right now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're,
It's difficult right now to build a studio because the investment kind of like imploded. The whole investment thing in games
yeah,
imploded with, there was a Web3 crash and NFTs and all that. So I think a lot of investors kind of prefer to sit on their money right now rather than spending it. They're like, oh, we're not going to beat inflation with all those shitty games that have been funded. So instead, we're just going to sit on it. And that makes sense. Again, like I'm working now a lot with investors, trying to understand, how to work with their studios that have a really promising idea, but they just don't have maybe they're blocked somewhere in the process. Maybe the game design, has an issue, like a fundamental flaw that they're trying to fix, and that's what I'm trying to work with. Because my advantage is I don't come from Riot, where I worked for 15 years for Riot, and then I only saw Riot.
yeah.
Here, my difference is that I saw a lot of different things, a lot of different processes, a lot of different production methods, and a lot of different game design visions. So it's easier for me to take something and try to steer it in a different way, and not being kind of like influenced by one particular way of developing games. So it's much more holistic
No, I
approach.
mean that's probably what anybody could hope for, but not everybody gets that chance at the experience, as you said as well. Hence why you have the option to do your consulting. But it's like somebody may have been like, they're a 20-year person at a company, and you're like, okay, I know how you do it here. There's 500 other companies out here doing it in very different ways, some good, some bad. But as you said, you've managed to, and that's what anybody can hope to do is like learn enough from, pull the good from where you've
Yeah.
been, understand what does work, and try and apply it wherever. Um, but that's still got to be hard for, as you said, certain companies maybe they hit a roadblock. I mean, if you had to ballpark just from what you've seen, kind of the industries you've been in, you literally just said 2 out of 3 games got canceled. Like
Mm.
how many games out there? Because we're seeing a lot of games this year, and more we get to see big, small. Like indies actually have kind of a place, but even indies are not small anymore. There's all different levels. How many games do you think that even get like kind of off the ground? But conceptually, it's like it gets to that point where like the creative maybe didn't deliver fully. Not like, hey, I have an idea and it never gets that far, but how many do you think don't make it? Just on say
So
like
so hard to say. Like even when you just look on Steam, the amount of games released per day per month, it's massive,
that's
right?
yeah.
So if you count all the individuals that are trying to build their own games alone, plus the mini teams, like 4 or 5 people are trying to build something, and then you have massive teams that are like they're companies that are huge and we haven't heard of them for years, you know.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say. Like even when you look at EA or Ubisoft, they're not pushing out games as often as they used to.
Mm-mm.
So there is a lot of games internally, I'm sure, at EA, Activision, Ubisoft, the big ones, that are being canceled or like Ubisoft had like X Defiant and so many more games that we heard about and then never again,
Yeah, it's
right?
like I
And
know
that's
Ubisoft did.
happening all the time.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the thing too, is like you hear take AAA space, it's like you hear a AAA game now takes about 5 years. It felt like it used to be maybe closer to 3. And then
Yeah,
there are like some studios which you never know how big, like Insomniac. I don't know how they do what they do. They're magic, cool, keep doing it. Um,
yeah,
like some of the stuff they pull off, and it's like on a pretty consistent basis. So,
yeah,
but you have the mammoths. I mean, Starfield's like 7 years or whatever it is. God of War and Ragnarok, those were multi-year endeavors, and then still using a lot of assets still takes another 4 years. Like you had God
yeah,
of War, you had all of what you built, and then it still took at least probably 4 more years just to turn around and make another one. And it's like, yeah, you do probably have some success built in because the franchise landed, but the process to build the first one wasn't small. And then you see the reaction of what it's like to get those things to actually land versus what you said. So many of them
yeah,
don't. So that's when it comes down to turn around and say like live service, making like a triple A live service game. That's what I was like. So coming from a Destiny player's perspective, like that is not to say a unicorn, but there's not a lot of them. Everybody always jokes about like the Destiny killer. I'm sure like it's
yeah.
I mean it's a joke. They're still the one standing. It's like, and they
That's true.
are, as a player, there's many times you're like, I don't agree with those decisions. So it's like, but it is still there. And that's when the player counts go up and down. We go through our roller coaster and our ebbs and flows of how it works. But like they have, as you said, they have managed to adapt to survive to live service while some other haven't. And then you've also got something like a Bethesda who's making their one-off, unique, massive game, but they also have had the support of obviously being a studio for a very long time.
Yeah,
It's for anybody at this point, as you said, like, hey, a studio we haven't heard of, so many of those we may never hear of. And I think that's kind of painful because there's so many really good ideas, but we don't, whether they don't make it to the finish line, the funding's not there, or as you said, maybe they hit a creative roadblock.
hmm,
Sometimes it's like, because I got a chance to play, and it's like, I'm talking about different games. I don't know how you feel when talking about specific games as a developer. It's like from the outside, but to play something like, it's kind of hyped up, and then marketing gets a marketing gets more bonus checks than, or should probably get some more bonus checks than they get, because they hype up games whether they come out well or not. The hype train that they can create sometimes is very impressive. But a game for me that was like, and then I was going to get a chance to play a game like at launch, got a chance to get a code, and it was Redfall. And for
yeah.
me, that was a game when I was like, okay, getting ready to download it. Like the reviews drop, and it's like, oh, and it's like, and that's not a small
Oh,
thing.
good stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and that's like a tough one to see. It's like something. Um, then there's the whole discussion. Actually, one of my co-hosts would probably kill me if I don't ask you, because you see something like Exoprimal. Doesn't look like it
Mhm,
has a really big player base, but they also see they have like a couple million players. It's on Game
mhm.
Pass. As a developer, just in the general scope of things, what are your thoughts about just Game Pass as on the whole? Now, if you want to go off record, that's if you don't want to say anything, that's totally
No,
fine.
it's fine. It's fine. I think Game Pass is very tricky because we don't have the data on how it affects really sales, right? How it affects the amount of players. But what's great about Game Pass is that a lot of live games nowadays and multiplayer experiences, they need a critical mass of players to be just viable, right? If you don't have enough players, the game will just die. And if it's a paid game, it's very hard to convince people to come and play your game if you only have like 100 players or 10 players, right? But if you don't pay the game, if the game is free to play, you always have a chance that the game will like just like explode and suddenly have millions of players. It happened with like Fall Guys, it happened with like tons of
Oh,
game
okay.
nowadays, where the game just like kind of like a time bomb and explode later, right? And I think Game Pass enables that a lot more, where you're playing a game, and then you have your friend that you see is playing something else, and there is almost no friction to come play with them. That's I think it's great, especially as a player. I think it's amazing. From a developer perspective, I still like to make those more narrative single player experiences, and those games are not what sells on a Game Pass, right? You're not going to get Game Pass for one single game. It's more because you're going to play the game as a live service. So I don't know how this affects those, like, let's say, more traditional experiences. Or indie games, right? Games Pass now has this huge amount of games that you can play. So it's also the discoverability problem as usual. You have so much choice. Why would you play this one instead of this one? So the smaller games that release on Game Pass might never be played because you have so many other big games that are just taking all the space. It's difficult.
Yeah,
It's a
no.
huge question. I think it's a really great question. I think it will be extremely interesting to see 10 years from now the retrospective.
I
What
mean, I think you kind of nailed it right there.
It's too
Yeah,
hard to say right now.
because I mean, from the player's perspective, it's like it's a steal. Like especially if you play a decent amount of games, the amount of money that you would spend, even with like a price increase recently of a little bit, if you're playing Ultimate and you play, like 3 games from it, you probably already got your money's worth, much less over the course of a year if you get a lot more. But that's always the question. If you like pull the player benefit out of it and go from the developer side, it's, as you said, is there an indie company that sometimes they say Xbox was great, got to play with them, and maybe this game wouldn't have made it off the shelf without their, here's the financial support. Maybe they get a payment up front, but also, as you said, on the other side, if it explodes, how is the payment on the back end? What is it like for sales? But also, it's like that's kind of one where a discussion that's happened on a lot of podcasts I've listened to has been like Starfield. It's not a small game. And if you put that on PC, you put that on PlayStation, that's not on Game Pass, what would the sales be like? I mean, we've seen Fallout and stuff, the history of Bethesda, they're not small games. So then that's the question, do you turn around and how much of your own sales are you cannibalizing? How much are you losing out on? Because as you said, that's the traditional game that doesn't feel like it works there. Because you're not going to
Yeah.
live in it, you're going to play through it the one time, and now I get to do it for nothing. Nothing per se, but it's your monthly fee,
Yeah.
but also it's like, and that's kind of, as you said, the 10-year retrospective. Will it get to a big enough point? Will it hit will it hits its critical mass to where at that point it's like it's making enough money for Microsoft and the studios that it has, that if they develop a single player game, then great. Then it
Yeah.
covers what the cost is, it covers what the sales could be, and that's just part of their model at that point. But the 10-year from
Yeah.
now is, I think, a really interesting one, because a lot of streaming right now is in kind of a world of weird place, because you've got Netflix and so many streaming services. Everybody's like, which one do I have? Do I turn it on? Do I turn it off? Prices are going up on those. I just saw my Disney one got raised, because it's all about content. Is that
Yeah.
have something new? Is it have a draw there? Am I just going to cancel it? I saw somebody joking. I was like, please don't let this one happen, that we're going to get back to where you have a contract on your Netflix or something like that. And it's like, oh God, no. Like, I don't want it to go down that road, but it's also like, it comes back to financials, the numbers. Like, they want to make money, and it's like, okay, so if we're going to, so you take something like Game Pass, we want to invest in something like Starfield 2, for example, or what's their next one going to be? Elder Scrolls 6, I think, is before Fallout 5. Shout out to Cognito, Ty Travis, Defining Duke. I listen to enough random stuff, but there's information to take. But say Elder Scrolls 6, that's going to take like 5-6 years to develop, because Starfield's in a similar boat. How much does that take? I mean, you picture something like Gran Turismo or Grand Theft Auto 6.
Yeah.
The scale of that game is just, it feels like it's going to be either ridiculously like massive detail, a world, who knows, but they've also been printing money for 10 years with Grand Theft Auto Online and stuff, and Take-Two's doing fine, but also that would never go on Game Pass because they know what they would lose out on. So it's like this weird thing to see, it's, as you said, you take mobile games have their own whole monetization model, which is a ball, can of worms in and of itself. But just the monetization of games at this point from a player, if you think about it analytically, it kind of hurts your brain. But from a developer, it's got to be just as bad. So as you said, it is in a really weird place for all of us right now. You have like massive AAA games that take like 5 years to develop, but do they go on Game Pass? I mean, I'm 40, so same as you. It's like I've at least been around the block a few times. It's like, and I played N64 games that were like $70, some were $80. So when this bump up to $70 happened, I'm like, it was bound to. For me, it's not that big of a deal, because games were 70 before. We lived at 60 for way too long, and now we get up to a $70 price point. I still don't know if that's enough for like, what do you turn around and say? And that's where you have collector's editions and other things.
Yeah.
So that's where I wonder
Merge
from.
and all that, yeah.
Yeah,
But
I was.
I think you're right. Like, you were talking about Redfall before, and I think that's, Arcane had an amazing track record of really great games, one after the other. Prey, I think, was a masterpiece. It was under loved, as it shouldn't have this
Yeah.
reception. It was like a great game. But yeah, and I think this game and also like a Cyberpunk kind of like showed that there is no such thing as too big to fail, right? Everybody's hyped for GTA 6. It might be the worst game ever, and we don't know
Yeah.
because that's the kind of world we live in right now. It's like it's super difficult to predict that even if you're really good at making games, the industry changes so much, especially when you make a game and then 7 years later you're making another game. It's like different techniques. You have different lighting systems, different everything is different. So you might be very good at making a game 7 years ago, but it doesn't mean that you can be really good again. So you have Starfield and GTA 6 and all this, and I think they're very conscious that it's not a given that those games will really work. So they have to be cautious. Like we've seen it with Ubisoft, had a like excellent track record of like every Assassin's Creed always release on time
Yeah.
and get more players than the previous one. And the last one costs incredible amount of money, but also made $1 billion within a week, right? So it's kind of like safe bets. And I think the industry is all about those kind of safe bets now. So you have like the VCs and venture capital that are trying to bet as many companies as possible because one is going to make $1 billion and that's going to cover all their costs. But AAA studios can't do that because the games are so expensive that you can't really try to bet on as many things as possible. So you're getting more cautious. You release your game slower. You maybe have a large team that can cover all your bases. You're never in danger. But it's difficult, especially games like Destiny that are trying to do a lot of things, right? You're a looter shooter. You're trying to do great FPS mechanics. You're also trying to do great loot mechanics, PvP, PvE, a lot of things. And that's so many places to fail, right? When you're trying to put all this together with live, with all this, it's really difficult. And I think for stuff like Game Pass to reconnect to that, those games, they're probably attracting players that are already on Game Pass. But the monetization model for AAA games is to try to reach a wide audience, and you kind of like analyze what's your niche, and then you kind of like make a statistics and be like, okay, we can sell to maybe 20 million players. But for Game Pass, they probably have already that many million of subscribers, so they always try to get more and more. But if you get like a new Fallout or a new like Starfield, kind of like core games,
Yeah.
people probably already subscribe to Game Pass, so you
Right.
probably get more new subscriptions by selling a Barbie game that you get people that are not on Game Pass yet, that now
That's
will be on Game Pass, or a Sims, right? This kind of games would get you new subscriptions. So I think their model is very different, and I think they would go for more like a broad. To be successful, they would need to get more broader amount of things like Netflix. They're getting Korean dramas and Indian stuff, and they're trying to go broader because their goal is to get the subscriber amount to grow. And you don't get that if the only thing you push out is The Witcher and more, or young adults fantasy.
exactly.
You
Yeah.
only get the same things. People will not subscribe more or a second time because they like the thing really well. Where if you sell a AAA survival game, you can sell multiple times a game in the same genre to the same player. So you wouldn't do that with a subscription system. It's tricky.
Yeah. No, I mean, that kind of also, this conversation is just going where it's going. So I do appreciate you entertaining all of where this is going. Acquisition. Huge
Yeah.
right now, especially obviously speaking of Activision, Microsoft, they had theirs, but also Embracer Group is huge. NetEase is like investing in a whole bunch of different places.
Um,
Um, I mean, as you said, there's studios that may need the investment. There's some studios that may get bought just for an IP. There's a lot of different reasons companies are acquired. Is that anything you've witnessed, been around, kind of seen from the outskirts?
Yeah, at Tencent, I was working directly with the acquisition, like the merger and acquisition departments, where they needed, design support to make sure that the studios they were acquiring or the projects were pitched, actually they had the backbone. The studio actually had the shoulders to build this kind of project. So I was helping them a lot, and it's interesting because it's a competition. All those big publishers, big investors, they see all those studios as potential acquisitions, and they're like, if I don't buy it, my competitor is going to buy it. And that's the risk. So I think that's how the whole thing started, where there was less and less fewer and fewer independent studios. And now if you look at AAA independent studios, there is so few of them. I think Avalanche in Sweden is one of the few that remains independent.
Are they the
But
ones who
all of
did
the
Harry
others.
Potter or Hogwarts recently? Was that
No,
Avalanche?
this is the other Avalanche. There's
Oh
two
God, there's
Avalanche.
more than one. Yeah,
One is
that's my
Avalanche
fault.
Studios. No, I get the confusion all the time. But there's Avalanche in Sweden that made um, ah, uh, Just Cause games.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I got you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
a lot of
Oh, and they're
expertise.
working on oh yeah, Second Extinction. I remember that being shown. It's not out yet, but I remember that being shown, and the Contraband they're working on as well.
As well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. Yep. Yeah. It was like, yeah, completely independent studios. Yeah, those are extremely rare at this point.
Yeah. I think it's because the games cost so much money that it's tempting to just be like, okay, we don't have to be hunting for publishers. We don't have to be hunting for or like selling ourselves every couple of years, to get enough money to
Being a
survive.
Bungie doing their little dance between people.
Yeah, but it's difficult, when you have a studio that is so big and you are responsible for the livelihoods of as many families. You need to provide something that is safe for your employees, and it's all about finding the right partner. And the thing is, even if you think that you're signing with EA, you're talking with someone that is great at EA, you join EA, the EA family, it might change. The goals might change, and it's very difficult when you're building a game for 7 years to know how things are going to evolve for the next 7 years. It's really difficult.
Yeah, because being a game developer seems to have its own world of set of problems, but it's just like the stress of whether it's a bigger game or just the financial, as you said, security. There's so
Yeah.
many reasons decisions get made. So it's like when you come down to, so it's like, so to take all of this broad discussion back down to something very small, um, when it comes to just making a map, just
Yeah.
one single map for something like Destiny Crucible, that's one thing a lot of players have been asking for a long time. Like 3 years with no new maps in Destiny 2. They put stuff in the content vault, and then we went for a very long time,
Mhm.
and they started to re-release some of them, and we've got some new ones. When it comes to, like, when you think about everything we just discussed for like literally the last 90 minutes, to come back down to what it's like to say, like, when a company goes to make a decision is like, we're not going to make PvP maps for whatever reason. As you said, who is making that decision and why? Likely the
Mhm.
higher ups who are seeing analytics of, or the financial people are saying, hey, if we release maps for PvP, this is going to take, 30 artists, 8 designers to make a couple of
Mhm.
maps. You've got testers that were going to be, depending on the size of your studio, testers that would be having to test the maps to make sure they feel well through the process that now aren't testing other things. And then we take something like Destiny to where they're making live service PvE story content, which they've been honestly fairly successful at making stories, whether you like the delivery method, but it's like they've had seasonal content with stories, and we've got now this pretty consistent cadence of pretty much 3 months a season outside of a few delays here and there, which what we get in a season for what generally as a player pays for, some people may like complain that one map isn't in there, but what you generally get in a season in 3 months is pretty impressive. They probably take 6 months to design. I think that's the
Yeah.
general cadence. So when
Yeah.
you turn
Yeah.
it, so it's like, so from your perspective, when a player says, how come we would like new, like over the past 3 years, we actually got a promise that they're going to do a map pack. Okay, so there's going to be 3 maps potentially, 3 or 4, guessing, ballparking, who knows. So their decision to say, okay, we're going to do that. What in that, in your mind, what does that take? Is that a point to where community feedback got so loud for a live service game that we do want to support it? Is there a point where maybe we're financially comfortable enough now that we can support it? They are also bought by Sony. So there's,
Mhm.
everybody jokes about the 3.6 billion, which probably went other places, but it's like there's still a Sony backbone there. As you said, there is somebody who's there. What, I mean, I get, and again, you can speculate, which is kind of the whole point of this discussion, to say, what in your mind would make somebody like Bungie, who's going to have Crucible or PvP in a game, to not design maps? But then now, do you think it's like feedback, financial, a combination of all of the above that can actually turn that ship maybe to maybe switch the way that goes?
It's difficult to say, but I would start with like the huge speculation and go narrower and
Yeah.
narrower towards something I'm more
Yeah. Like
sure
this is
about.
all speculate. Again, it's like whole point of
I
this, but that's kind of the whole idea.
I don't think Sony has would say anything. I think they were like, okay, you guys are doing a great game. We're willing to pay you that much money because we are confident in what you're doing with your game and where you're going with the game. I don't think anyone would buy a company for so much to change everything that they do. So I think they're still fairly independent, or at least in the decision-making process, they're fairly independent until they will start making bad decisions, really bad decisions that hurts the bottom line. Then Sony will step in and say, hey, maybe you need to change your ways. But we're not there yet, right? The game is still fairly successful, so Sony wouldn't say anything about this. So the decision definitely comes from higher ups. No one in the development team can say, I'm tired of making maps. Let's stop that, right?
Yeah.
It definitely comes from higher ups, and they're definitely seeing data. Then what kind of data can be different? So either they would see that the PvP players are allowed a very loud minority. Maybe it's 1% of players that actually enjoy PvP, and they're like, oh, we're spending so much time for just 1% of players. It's not worth it. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that the team has been trying to make PvP maps, under the radar, and they haven't succeeded in doing something that was to the standard that players liked, and so they decided, higher up that yeah, we don't want to release something subpar, so we're just gonna stop doing PvP maps. Maybe we don't have the expertise, or maybe it's too difficult, or maybe players have unreasonable expectations. Also possible. So it's based on data, but where the data come from, it's impossible to say, obviously, unless they release something. But I think it will be healthy for them to release something. They see people complaining, and if they say, "Yeah, you guys are just 1% of our audience, we don't care about you," it's still not going to hurt them a lot
Yeah.
to say that. It's still 1% of players, right? So if that was the case, they could say they would never. But I think this kind of transparency would still be healthy, so people understand why those decisions are made. I think that's the one thing that people are really complaining. Even in my thread, people that were insulting me or anything, they were mostly they didn't know, they wanted to know, they were frustrated of not knowing, right? And I think they were like, why are there's no new maps, this is not an excuse, and I totally understand that. I understand that they want answers. It's not that they want a PvP map, they want an answer
Yeah.
as to why there's no PvP map. I think that's fair
Yeah.
from players.
No, I mean, I think you actually hit on something perfectly because the when Joe Blackburn recently put out his little 15-minute Twitter video, just kind of
Mhm.
the response to the state of the game, which didn't go over so well,
Yeah.
he mentioned that even when it comes to modes, for example, that they've had in Crucible Labs, kind of their public testing space that they've used before, they're like, we haven't put them into the general playlist because of a couple bugs here, whether it's voiceover or little things, and they're like, they almost feel like hamstrung that it wants to be perfect, as you said. Um, and they said they're gonna stop doing that. So it's like, and when you say something like a voiceover, like a VO line, I'm like, so it's like Crucible is Crucible because of Lord Shaxx, like in his voiceover and kind of the fun that he has in it. But it's like, but if you have an issue over here that maybe it's like, hey, just let us know. It's like voice lines could be a little weird. Still wanted to get you the mode. I was like, most players, as you said, I think would generally understand that if they're told. But also, it's like there's a balance of like whether it's, and pride's the wrong word. It's just like perfectionist. Somebody wants to still deliver the best product they possibly can, and I would imagine every single dev from the top down always wants Destiny to be the best game. They want Rainbow Six to be the best game it possibly can.
Okay.
But there's also got to be somebody in the producer level to say, we still have to deliver something at some point, as you said. You have to lock it. You have to lock certain things. Like, okay, the art's here, the lighting works. Don't touch it. Like those moments have to happen for anything to get delivered.
Yeah. It's difficult. I think the producer job, where you get the budgets and you have to allocate the budgets into the team wants to do everything. They can't do everything. You have to allocate the budget, cut some stuff, and then you have to say, okay, that's enough. You worked enough. We can ship now. The developers, we are our own worst critics. Every time we see a trailer, we're like, oh my god, they cannot. Why did they put this? They should have waited, two more. Days, so they had like the final version of this wall, and then literally no one else saw that,
Yeah.
and it was fine for everything. But like when you see the trailer for a new game, and then you see the specific place in the game, usually it's very different, and people are like, oh, it looks better now, or it was better in the trailer, but we are so hyper aware of any single
What
flaw.
is Spider-Man Puddlegate or whatever it was with like
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
water, like, and you're like, you're flying by a Spider-Man so fast, you're probably never gonna know, and it was such a big deal. And yeah, like there's a guy who worked on rendering the puddle who was in a corner crying because he made the world sad about the puddle, and it's like, but
Yeah.
nobody's, and as you said, normally nobody knows. My wife, she does she's done some musical theater productions that she's been in, and she's like, "Oh, I think I missed this one thing." Nobody in the audience knows. No one has a clue what happens. Like, I can tell you from us, where there's so much going on, whether it's like, I mean, unless you just like completely miss a note as a singer, it's like no one's gonna know most of the
Yeah,
time. It's like a lot of it's going on, a lot of it's so fast. So as you said, like when it
it's a
comes
great analogy. I love it. It's a great analogy. Yeah.
I was like, I mean, she recently like did one again, so it's just like it kind of came up perfectly. But it's like, yeah, it's like generally the production. There's a lot, like 99% of things going right. One artist may know that plant is wrong, and it just like eats at them a little bit, and you're like, nobody knows,
Yeah.
it's fine. And that's where the producer does have to, and that's again where the balance of what the higher ups know versus what the I don't want to say lower, but it was like, whether the
Yeah.
managers versus like the individual contributors, better way to phrase it, I think. What the managers know sometimes is like, it's going to be okay. Kind of have to pat them on the shoulder and console them. It's going to be fine to say those moments, but
Yeah.
also that's the only way things get delivered are those people making those decisions sometimes. The interesting one is when it comes to things like microtransactions. When you get into the mobile space, they're really heavy. When you get into live service games or free to play is very heavy. That's the only way they make money. So you take something
Mm.
like Diablo has microtransactions and it's like a $28 armor set, and you're like, what are you doing? I already paid for the game. And then you have a
Yeah.
season pass, but then you have Path of Exile on the other side, totally free to play, but they have like $60 armor sets. But every so often you're like, yeah, I got like 2,000 hours in this game. Sure, here's $60. So it's always kind of that weird player perspective as you're talking about when it comes to even mobile to console for somebody like Tencent. Such a development style to say, we're going to build this around pick three or playtime. And when it's mobile, it's always like, if you want to play more, then you got to pay a little more and do these little like kind of things. The balance of microtransactions is always a tough one, I think, for companies because they always want to make money. But it's also on the player side, we would love to see zero of them. So it's like
Yeah.
when it comes to the balance of those things, it's really hard to sit there and wonder. It's like, okay, so financially, it's like you want to make these decisions, but you want to make this much money. You think this will. I mean, that's kind of one of those things where it comes to data, where it says the price of an armor set in most free to play kind of games. There is
Mhm.
data that says this is what this should cost. Obviously, that's data the consumer's never going to see because like the whales pay for it or whatever it is. Because I look at an armor set for like $15, I'm like, you're out of your mind. It was 5, I would probably buy 3. That's always a weird one for me. Is like kind of the moments of like if it was cheaper, but also it's like what is it like to an artist? Like does that so from a microtransaction side to say, hey, you're just building armor sets. So this comes up to another point of discussion that I somehow weaved us to. Um, when it comes to say like an armor set as a microtransaction, that's one of those
Mm.
things that recently, and again, sorry to bring up Destiny, a lot of what my channel is about, so it's just kind of a good point of reference. um Bungie had said recently that they were going to on an annual basis release a set of armor for like the basic playlists and just kind of have
Mhm.
one per year. This past year they didn't do that, kind of went under the radar, and then everybody's like, excuse me, where's our armor set? We didn't get the one you promised us that you said you were going to do. But then also on the other side, everybody's like, by the way, Eververse, which is where you do microtransactions, is loaded with stuff all the time. So the
Yeah.
balance
Yeah.
of like, so this is a question is like, and again, it's not level design, it's more, it's different work. But what is, somebody who's saying, hey, like just make a map, like just go have like 2 people go over in the corner, pump out some maps. Like it's not that easy since as we discussed, when it comes to making an armor set or something along those lines, it's not the scale of a level, but what does the player not know about that process is the best question I can ask.
Problem is that making armor sets is ridiculously cheap. It's so cheap to make, any
All right,
kind
now
of
you're
like.
shooting my argument in the face.
No. But it's making cosmetics is so cheap, and it's very easy for higher ups to convince themselves, because when you're looking at, for example, you're making the game and you do a player testing and you see that the UX, the UI of the game is horrible. Then you go back to your higher ups and you say, yeah, we need to allocate some budgets to redo the UI. And then they have to make a choice. How many players are going to quit the game or not buy the game because the UI is horrible? Whether they see that you have a $15 microtransaction, it's not even micro at this point.
No, that's
$15.
yeah. Like that's a meal. It's a meal or it's a digital nothing, but yeah.
Yeah. It's a $15 armor sets. They're like, okay, we're gonna sell 1,000 of them. It costs maybe $2,000 or $3,000 to make one armor set, and completely ballpark. I have no idea how much
Of
it costs.
course, yeah.
But let's say it costs 2,000. We need to sell 200 of them or 100 of them. we're probably going to sell realistically 10,000 of them. They see the money immediately. It's super easy to make the calculation and be like, oh, that the math checks out. We're going to make money out of this. Making changes like, making a new PvP map or making changing the UI completely, you just don't know what is actually going to bring you in terms of revenue. So I think if you're an artist or a designer, you might be very skewed toward be like, oh, this UI is absolutely horrible. We absolutely need to change it. And players are like, meh.
It's fine. Like they work with it, right?
Yeah, so it's very difficult for either sides, to make rational decisions on this. So yeah, again, not an easy answer, but definitely microtransactions are just so cheap. And games like Overwatch, like you just go on ArtStation to see portfolios of people, and you type Overwatch, and you would see how many outsourcing studios made skins for
Man.
Overwatch. Ultimates, anything, almost barely anything was made internally by the team because they just outsource. Like it's so cheap. So just do it if you can, right?
Yeah.
And for them, it's you can parallelize, you can send 100 at the same time if you want to make a special event. You can do all that, which you can't with a level. With the level,
Yeah.
you have like internal game engine, you have like processes, and it's complicated. You can't just easily outsource it. So you have to pay your dev to do it. It means they're not working on the next game. They're still working on live content. It's difficult.
No, I mean that's kind of one of those things is so then you get to the point of I do want to come back to the engine just before we wrap up though. But when it comes to say like armor and stuff, like so it's the balance of you have a microtransaction store, but you want to have stuff you earn as well, typically. Because as a player, it's like I want to still be able to go do a difficult activity and basically earn something versus over here. That's a weird one to me because if you say again, you say they're cheap again, everybody's probably going to have a different reference of what is cheap, who's making it, what's the detail involved in those things, but relatively on the smaller scale of things, the balance of like, okay, so if they're getting more stuff in here, but Eververse always has it, that at that point it does feel more of a financial decision. And again, you said the same thing as well. Financially, it's like we don't know if the effort to put in 4 or 5 maps is going to make a difference, or is it that we should take the artists, the designers, and then the testers who are essentially going to be involved in making maps. If they're making seasonal content that we sell for season pass that is going to tell a new story and those types of things, it may be a little more, but we can still see typically what our revenue is going to be like versus here, a PvP map that is in the free-to-play part of the game that could get some engagement, could not. Even if like 40% of the player base plays it, is that going to bring in new players? Is that going to do anything versus have you played this new season in Destiny? It's actually pretty cool. Like that's something that somebody can say, but then there's a lot of players that are going to turn and say, well, 40% of the player base plays. So then what if the season had a map? But what is that?
Yeah.
But is that a point where it's like if a season had a map and they're building, I mean, recently we had like Destiny will come with 1 or 2 activities. It will have like narrative voiceover story content. You're going to get new weapons. You're going to get new armor. All of that comes in a season without a map. So then the question would be, it's like, so to make that and do it at the same time to like co-develop. So if we did a map every time with a season, I mean, are you almost talking not double, but it's like you get a full development suite for PvP plus your seasonal content. You would almost need to do both, would you? As it sounds like.
Yeah, you would, and you need to make sure that if you do a map, like you add a PvP content to your regular scheduled content add-ons, and you see, I don't know, 90% of your usual player base plays. But then if you don't put a PvP map, you have 80% of your player base that plays. You're like, well, is it worth losing 10% of our audience for the money we save, right? For the costs. They probably made those decisions and decided that yes, it was worth it. But will it work in the long term? That's not sure, right? Because maybe people are not playing PvP all the time, but they like to play PvP from time to time. And if they don't have new content, they will just stop playing faster than they would have if they didn't have. And those kind of things are a little bit more insidious. It's very hard to calculate those kind of things. Like one of the greatest talk, or it was I don't remember if it was a book or a talk about World of Warcraft, when they were deciding whether they were building more common and rare items or they were building more epic and legendary items, right? Because 99% of the players will go through the contents for common and rare items, but the epics and legendary, only very few people would play it. So we would use them, would own them. So is it worth putting efforts in there? Turns out, yes, definitely, because even if you don't have it, it's a carrot and you want it.
Yeah, the carrot. Okay.
You don't have it, you want to get there, you want to have it. And PvP might be a thing like this where you play enough PvE, you feel confident enough with your skills. So it's kind of like the part of it. If you don't have PvP, you maybe not have the same incentive to play and play again until you're good enough, and maybe you have like some confidence issue and you will never play PvP. But at least you would try to get better and you would end up playing PvP. So this kind of like, there's like a very direct, easy answer to just like look at number differences and be like, we don't lose that much numbers. But you don't know how it's going to affect the long term. Yep. Never. You can't predict that. And maybe they will, suffer later. You don't know.
Yeah. I was like, I could take you down a whole rabbit hole where people used to say there were weapons that you could pursue only through Crucible. And that was when it had more of the focus, and since those have gone away, also it feels like the focus has too. So it's like almost a decision to take the carrot out of Crucible. Also, they took the development time behind it as well. So it seems like both of those kind of coincided, because you said the carrot's not there. So that's kind of an interesting piece. No, but when it comes to an engine, I could talk to you for a long time, it seems like, so I do want to respect your time. So I'm going to try and tie this up in about 2 hours to be at least reasonable. When it comes to an engine, and you talked about just like the lighting piece of like Rainbow Six, you said there was like one lady who was very specialized to like work, and it's like she worked on the first map and then she helped you get, and that was her specialty. People joke, kind of, this is where an armchair moment comes in, but people are like, hey, just like port Destiny over to Unreal. Obviously that's asinine. Like that's kind of one of those, it's like, obviously that's not going to be a thing. The Tiger engine's been around forever. And also one of those things about engines that I have to, at least in my head, believe games play a certain way and feel a certain way because of the engine they're built in. I have to imagine that that's at least kind of true. So when it comes to something along the lines of when Bungie tells the player base that it takes a fairly decent amount of work to take a map that was in their previous engine, because it was a couple expansions ago they did a big lighting rework, and that's what lighting is standing out to me as just kind of a thing. That's why I wondered what was most difficult, but it's probably all different pieces. But to take a map and then bring it forward to whatever their engine variation is now, what does that sound like in your mind to do? If you had a previous version of an engine and it's an internal one, and then now you have a newer version, what does it sound like to take, again, like that one and then bring it up to a new one? And again, speculation, different engine, nobody knows. But when you say like the lighting was that tricky, that actually kind of makes me wonder. So it's like, just from your side, what does that sound like?
Yeah, it's really difficult to say. I think the main problem would be the art assets. The textures are completely. I know that the textures are completely different between. So when you look at an object, right, you have a color, obviously, but you also have the way the light reflects on it, whether the light scatters inside, if it's metallic, or if you have like all kind of like fancy effects of like sparkles inside the material, these kind of things. And the way they were doing it in the first Destiny and the second Destiny is completely different. So you would have to rebuild all the materials for the maps. The thing is, maps are usually not that expensive in terms of materials. They're usually following the same kind of principles. The same kind of materials are reused in a lot of places. So that's not too complicated, but it's grunt work. It's not something anybody wants to do. It's really, it's easy to get wrong. It's easy to fuck up everything. You just make a wrong connection of materials and you can't play anymore. So it's tricky. And then you have the objects themselves, so I don't know how they do their collisions, but we can expect their collision systems maybe change a little bit, between the two. So you have to check every single thing that was ported. Game engines like Unreal, there's so many people working on the engines itself, right? And also they have Fortnite money, so it's like a very well built.
Yeah, Fortnite money. Yeah, that's its own type of money.
But you can take the Unreal Engine 4 assets and port them to Unreal Engine 5, and it will calculate all the differences that they have to calculate to make the object run in Unreal Engine 4, Unreal Engine 5. They will tell you this needs to be changed because the engine version is different. But I'm 100% sure that if their engine on Destiny is the same kind of stuff that we had at Ubisoft, the engine is holding by strings. The bare minimum have been made, so no extra cost would be spent there. And usually artists have to like beg to get extra features or a checkbox that would save hours of our time, because engineers are so busy on other things that the UX of the tool is really not there. So I imagine it would be a lot of manual work, and you will be completely in the dark for most of the porting.
Wow.
So not that easy.
No, no. I mean, this is one of
Sure.
those things when you say it's like a map in itself. It's like you may have the frame, but it sounds like, especially, it's like if it is an in-house engine, there's no magical tool to say, export to UE5, no magic like that. But also, as you said, the little things you don't think about. It's like, because I messed around with a little bit with Blender before, not much by any stretch, but it's like I saw you like draw the line. I'm sitting there going like a texture to how it reflects to how it interacts with things, all those little like lines and stuff to weigh. And if you're doing that with like objects and colors and making sure things reflect right and still feel the same. And then when you talked about the magic of like one light in a hallway, but not two, so it doesn't blow out the entire hallway and stuff like, if all of those
Yeah.
things are a piece in there and somebody's sitting there having to manually do it, that is a point to where that's not a small amount of work, it sounds like, but also again, depending on, and this is where the big speculation around Bungie comes, Marathon got announced. I don't know if you saw that announcement, but like everybody wonders, like, okay, so when you say the expertise of the PvP team went away, the
Mhm.
speculation is the expertise of the PvP team went over to Marathon. And again,
Yeah,
when they
it's
did their documentary, their little like intro documentary thing about it, they're like, I recognize you. I like half the team that was there, they were leads in Destiny. It's like, and now they're over here. So it takes time to lead people up, but also what expertise do they have in that engine that somebody's having to learn new? And then now if they're a newer player trying to bring up a map from a previous version of an engine manually to the new one without the expertise of that person, like how many resources can you pull, what is it worth, and that type of thing.
yeah. It's very tricky. Like, you're definitely right, especially if no one has the expertise of the previous engine or how things were built, but also what wouldn't work anymore. So they might try to bring something in, and the whole thing crashes, and they have no error messages, because error messages are for users. And when you're working in the game development, we don't have error messages for ourselves, right? Like,
Yeah.
no one spent time to write this little piece of code that tells you what crashed. So it's always like black magic, and you have to try to figure out, okay, if I bring this object, does it crash? No. Okay, so if I bring this light, does it crash? No. And then you bring more and more stuff until it stops crashing. But it's so tricky. Like, uh, our internal engines are usually very, very weirdly cobbled together. Like, the engine for Rainbow Six Siege was actually the same engine for Assassin's Creed, but they were so different by the time Rainbow
Oh,
Six
I've
Siege
got
was
to
released.
imagine. Yeah.
They
Because
couldn't
you're,
do anything that Assassin's Creed was doing, and also they developed the engine in their own way, so there was nothing that was compatible anymore. It's like forked completely, and they're different things now. We didn't have anything that was like making sure that you can reuse something from a previous game. So they developed a whole thing that allow you to bring an object from a previous Assassin's Creed to a new one, but it was not possible before they built this tool.
yeah.
So this kind of things is, yeah, it's a bit trickier.
No, I mean, this is why I personally love talking to developers because not being one myself and just like enjoying the games is cool to kind of peek behind the curtain to a point, but
Yeah,
also for, I mean, even just me like making YouTube content, whether it's how I edit, whether I cut something to match up with a song, beat, or anything like that, and then you watch whether it's a commercial, a movie, blown away like something like Oppenheimer, whatever it may be, when you peek a little bit behind, ignorance is bliss to a point. The less
yeah,
you know about something, the easier it is to kind of appreciate, but then the more you know, then you look at it a little bit differently. And then it kind of gets to the same point as for like a player. It's like the more you know about developer development, even just from, like chatting with you for 2 hours, the more you can appreciate what it takes to go through it. It's like,
yeah.
but it's like there's also sometimes where it's like some players are like, I don't care about what it takes. I just want to have fun. And that's like kind of
Yeah.
that's the got to be the hard pain point for the developer side because you guys always want to make it that way. And it's like
Mhm.
there have to be somebody has to make sure the lights stay on. Somebody has to say this is going to be good enough. Somebody's going to say 80% of the player base is going to be okay. And then every so often somebody's not going to be happy with one of the decisions, which there are countless of them in the whole
Yeah.
process of getting a game from, as you said, what does the marketing say this theme for an expansion might be to get you a map that actually makes sense, functions, run, has lighting, doesn't blow out your eyeballs, and everything else, like all of that stuff in the process in between. It's like it is a hell of a process to get there. So getting to peek behind the curtain to see whether it's like, just the financial things coming from like a Tencent or to see like Ubisoft when it comes to making a map. It's like the the average gamer's mind would probably kind of explode a little bit if they had a lot of the information that it takes to get there. Just it takes to make what they do happen.
Yeah.
But I also wish, as you said, the transparency would happen a little more to know it's like, do you have any idea how much is going on outside of what you play? Like, I mean, I sit there and I play God of War or Spider-Man or Destiny, and it's like what we don't see and what we're not supposed to see has got to be as, I mean, everybody jokes about Destiny is held together by spaghetti code, and you said by like strings and thread and duct tape. It's all sounds like it's a lot of the same. It
Yeah.
is, and even with something like Unreal, yeah, the engine's going to be there for you. That doesn't mean the game is holding together by much more than that, it sounds like.
Yeah, but it's a bit of a when you're saying ignorance is bliss. I think it's true for developers as well. Like there was a talk from Ted Price from Insomniac, who was saying that every time he's blown away by something in a game, and he's like, I have no idea how they did that, and he's an excellent programmer as well. So when he doesn't know, it's really tricky. And I had this moment when I was looking at the roads in GTA, and I was like, those roads, they're a massive road network in GTA, obviously, but like the road marks, the destruction on the road, the little puddles and all that is like so carefully made. I was like, their procedural generation to build a road and everything is like that must be a crazy thing. And then I happened to be in India, and I talked to a developer in India who happened to have worked on Rockstar titles, and he told us it's all manual. He placed every single marking, every single cracks on the road. Like even if there was a procedural generation, they modified everything by hand. And I was like, that broke
Oh my
the
God.
story. I was imagining they had the best tool ever, and it turns out it's just a massive amount of work. And that was Ted Price was saying something like this as well. Is like every time he's blown away by a feature, he get to ask the person how did they do that, and he's always disappointed because the answer is always a shit ton of work.
That's, I mean, yeah, like there's no question that like, oh, it's usually a lot more work than anyone would probably expect.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
but yeah, for Grand Theft Auto to think, which Grand Theft Auto was it? Was it
I think it
5?
was I think it was 5. Yeah, yeah. The guy was not very old,
It
so
was
I
a
think it was.
massive game too.
Yeah,
Like that
exactly.
is,
I was building a game called Steep and Riders
yeah,
Republic. It was
yeah.
like big open world sports game, and we were looking at the road networks we wanted to do for the American national parks. And I was looking at all the techniques, and I was like, well, nothing looks as good as GTA. So I was trying to figure out how they did it. And this guy in India just told me, yeah, we just did everything manually. And I was like, damn
You're like, oh,
it.
there's no magical tool. It's like it's just a whole bunch of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a little depressing, but also a little in
Humbling, right?
humbling, yeah, humbling, eye opening to know it's
Yeah.
like somebody's just like painstakingly. 'Cause I mean, you think about where like Starfield, they say there's going to be procedural generation to some extent.
Yeah, yeah.
As you said, some artists went back through to make sure that procedural generation doesn't look like junk. And if they have 1,000 planets, somebody's got to do a little bit of the groundwork to make you don't show up to a giant pixel. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
just to
yeah,
make sure it looks reasonable.
yeah.
No, I was like, I think we kind of touched on a lot of everything that I wanted to. I think we probably also wandered off topic many times. Um, but that's kind of what I was hoping for, is just to make this be a conversation, kind of see where it went. Um, but when it comes to making anything in a game, nothing is going to be easy. But also, it's like, as a developer, do you get to play games that often? Do you?
Yeah, especially in between, like when I was in China and then I moved out of China, and I felt like I missed a lot on the new generation games.
Yeah.
The games that are the Gen Z are playing, what kind of games they started playing, because that's going to affect everything they see after that, right? And if most of them started with Fortnite or games like that, and if they expect the same kind of Fortnite is quite polished, right? It's like the game is quite polished, and you have like 100 players, and it works on mobile, it works on PC, it works on console, it's like cross-platform everywhere, and that's the kind of like level they would expect. So I was trying to play more and more of those games, and also they're playing games like Roblox, which is the jankiest thing I've ever seen, and they're super happy with it, and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, why not? So it creates, for me, it's interesting to understand kind of like what is the situation right now with games. And I'm really happy with Baldur Gate 3 as well. Also setting the bar for RPGs. And
I want to play that. I'm a little terrified to start it because I don't have the time right now, but I want to play it
yeah,
really, really bad.
same. It's like you need to set aside some time ahead of you to play game. And I'm really good at playing games over a weekend where I would start and you would not see me for like 16 hours of
Just
just
gobbling.
playing the game. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then I will not play for like a week or two. And those kind of games are too long. I can't finish them in 16 hours. I can't finish it over a weekend. So it's daunting because I'm like, I'm going to waste every single weekend for the foreseeable future. And it's daunting. So I think nowadays the game industry is kind of like in a weird spot where we see that there is more and more short attention span stuff with like, TikToks and stuff. But you also have longer and longer things. Like people are binging series on Netflix.
Yeah.
They're watching video essays, of 8 hours about an obscure game, or podcast of 2 hours, right? And I think we're seeing more and more longer content and more and more shorter content. And I think the kind of like sweet spot that we had for a really long time is kind of like disappearing. And it's I think it's not worrying. It's just that we need to adapt as well. But games that started development 5 years ago, they're going to release, in 2 years. It might be a very different thing. So I would love to see games where it's like a 30 seconds, triple A quality, but the game session is 30 seconds or 15 seconds. For me, that would be super fun. You play maybe 20 sessions in a row, and it's like chaotic and explodes everywhere, and it's fun. And also the long sessions as well. So something kind of more extremes. That would be great.
That makes perfect sense though, because yeah, I mean, I feel like that's probably one of the reasons why Fortnite does have a decent amount of success. As you
Hmm.
said, you can go in, you might die in 30 seconds, you might die in like 15, 20 minutes, but it's not going to eke into hours if you want to get in one session of something. I'm playing a game right now called Dave the Diver. It's a
Oh yeah.
little indie game. Okay, you know what it is. And it's just this little loop, and you might be down in the ocean for like 20 minutes. And if you just have time for like one dive or
Yeah.
one dive and then sell the sushi at night kind of thing, it's short enough where like
Mhm.
I can do that while, I got like 30 minutes before I'm going to interview this guy. Maybe I can knock out a round, that kind of thing. Maybe it's that. But also, as you said, it's like when you do want to commit to something like a Boulder's Gate, it's like it's daunting to think a lot of my free time right now to really enjoy this game is going to be spent on this. And if somebody's like, hey, go watch this TV series, it's really cool. It's only got 250 episodes. You're like, oh my, like it is. That's almost why it's like, a 2 hour podcast is about the same length as a movie, because depending on what some people do or work on, or as you say, if somebody's sitting there coding, they might have a podcast to listen to that fits that bill. But also at
Yeah.
some point, somebody has a couple of minutes to themselves. How do I get that, little, the little dopamine thing? And that's where the, mobile games and little things can be good. But it's like sometimes the mobile game, like the way they're developed to be like financially, like poking
Yeah.
you all the time, they're frustrating as hell. So it's a balance, as you said. If there was a point you could pay $20 for that $30 30-second experience, but all the time, you're gonna make a gazillion dollars, because that would be the magic. If somebody's like, I can just do this, but I can always do it anytime. Yeah, that would be kind of the magic. Well,
You were talking about Games Pass, and for me, the best investment I made on was either the Apple Arcade or the Google Play equivalent, where you play games where you know that they're not going to try to sell you something, they're not going to be ads, and the games are quite
yes.
high quality.
Yep.
And for me, I was like, this is the best thing I did for my phone, because I play good games now on the phone thanks to those systems. But PC never really had this problem, So having a Games Pass doesn't really fit this niche, which works so well on mobile because it's like sort out the stuff for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's one of the things my friends and I joke about. It's like, I will pay you $10 just to leave me alone. That's
Yeah.
kind of I mean, that's one of the things we actually joked about on, I mean, this is the last word, it's gonna be a bonus, but, like, when I have my co-host on here typically, and we'll talk tonight, that's okay, I have another 2-hour podcast tonight, um, but when we talk, it's like, what is the amount of money, and sometimes we would wanna ask that you would pay to Bungie to say, "I want all of it, leave me alone." Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no extra microtransaction, whatever that number is for the year. And it's like, do you turn that into a subscription model? Should it be? Everybody freaks out on a subscription model. So it's like there is
Mhm.
no balance of everything. But when it comes to like how those decisions are made, as you said, it's kind of fluid right now. And what it is now for Starfield, for example, 5, 6 years from now, when Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, who knows what it's
Yeah.
going to be like? That's going to be a
Yeah.
different animal. What will Game Pass cost? How's it doing? What does the average game cost? Did they bump it up to 80 with inflation? Who knows? It's been fun to be a gamer for about 30 years, but it's also been a very interesting journey to watch where it's at. And like on the gamer side, whether it's like interviewing you guys every so often, it's awesome to get the perspective behind the scenes. And yeah, it's
No
been amazing to take 2 hours of your time, but I do want to make sure it kind of lets you get back to your family and
worries.
stuff. You're in another country, and
It's
that's what I'm
okay.
saying. It's like, man, I could pick your brain like once a year and be like, all right, man, how's it going? Like, but this is kind of one of those things that hopefully you had a good time on the interview, had a good discussion and
Definitely.
everything. But it's like from anybody who listens to this on my end, my one recommendation, and then I'll let you kind of say kind of a closing piece. Take a second every so often as a gamer and picture yourself on the other side of the equation. You're getting to enjoy the fun that came from a lot of work, a lot of tough decisions, a lot of possibly canceled games and other things that may have made it out there. Now it's like, I understand sometimes it's like you may not agree, you may not understand, and it's like if you're a player who plays Destiny for 3 years and doesn't see a new map, you're going, I like whether it's good or not, I don't agree with the decision, and that may be a thing, and that's why sometimes it's like good to take a break. But also on the other side, it's like it's not an easy thing to do, and the things that sometimes in your head that should be easy, it's not. And the
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
the things that are made for a very different like decision. Like you say, armor may be easy to do skins, but in turn, what is it like to do a map? Not as easy as most of us would have thought, and definitely not me. So anything you want to say as we kind of like finalize, wrap up thoughts, just from your world of experience in games, what is the stuff that you would pass on to this side of the controller?
I think all developers are passionate. Like, it's not an industry that pays really well. It's not an industry that has like nice, calm hours. So we're all passionate. Most of us are gamers, and all the decisions that have been made for games are usually because we think they're the best decisions, and sometimes they're because higher ups thinks that they're the best for the financials of the company. So I think it's really healthy to try to understand why those decisions have been made, and I think it's on a developer's side as well to be more transparent about it, but never be shy about asking. Really, instead of insulting directly, like literally ask. And a lot of developers will be kind of okay to answer those questions. Sometimes off the record, we've seen a lot of journalistic like websites die over the years, and they were the ones that were doing this kind of like anonymous surveys of developers, what happened during the development of this game, and that was super healthy. It was showing a light of what happened behind the scenes, and sometimes it was horrible, and it was important that it was said out loud. So never forget to do your due diligence and try to understand why those things happen. And I think it's on our side as well to be more transparent.
Very
And you
well
can always
said.
find me on Twitter and ask me questions. Always glad to answer.
Yeah, you might get a 12 to 15 piece thread. So
Oh, at
at
least, yeah.
least. Well, it has been absolutely my pleasure to chat. Thank you very much. And then for everybody listening, if you are looking this gentleman up on Twitter, it's very simple. It's PR4GLICK. Um, and it's Alexis. And if he goes to go follow him, and that way, if he does get back into a little bit more of the development world instead of consulting world and launches something, we all have to be there and watch. Um,
Awesome.
but
Thank you.
again, thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute blast. And to everybody watching this one, hopefully you enjoyed the show. If I can do more of these interviews, you know where to find them. So subscribe, follow, like, and all of those things as well. So thank you guys and have a good one.